I slammed the front door of my Buckhead mansion and pretended to leave for a sudden work emergency. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, I pulled out my phone and tapped on the baby monitor app just to check on my 2-year-old daughter. The screen loaded, and the voices that echoed through the quiet garage left my blood running completely cold. What my husband said to the woman standing in our living room shattered my entire reality. Before I share the details of this ultimate betrayal, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to sit in silence while planning the perfect revenge against someone who severely underestimated you. The afternoon started like any other typical Friday in our affluent Atlanta neighborhood. I am Maya, 32 years old, and a senior financial attorney managing portfolios that most people cannot even fathom. I built my career from the ground up, navigating the cutthroat corporate world as a Black woman and securing my place among the city elite. My husband Malik always played the role of my biggest cheerleader. We had a sprawling 6-bedroom estate, luxury cars in the driveway, and a life that looked flawless on the surface. That afternoon, I packed my leather briefcase, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and told Malik I had an emergency meeting downtown. A major client was facing a crisis, and I needed to be in the office to review a stack of urgent contracts. Malik gave me his trademark charming smile, the one that made me fall for him 8 years ago. He wrapped his arms around my waist, kissed my forehead, and told me not to work too hard. He said he would take care of our daughter and make sure dinner was ready when I got back. I smiled, kissed him back, and walked out the heavy mahogany front door. I pulled the door shut behind me, the loud click echoing on the porch. But I did not have an emergency meeting. I had actually finished my work early and wanted to surprise Malik with a quiet weekend getaway I had been planning. I walked into the attached garage, climbed into my SUV, and closed the car door. I sat there in the dim light of the garage, enjoying a moment of silence before I planned to walk back inside and reveal my surprise. Out of habit, I unlocked my phone and opened the baby monitor app. I just wanted to see if our toddler was napping in her room. But I had recently installed a secondary camera in the main living room to keep an eye on her when she played near the fireplace. I switched the view to the living room camera, expecting to see Malik sitting on the sofa watching television. Instead, I saw a woman pacing across my expensive Persian rug. The sharp click of her designer heels on the hardwood floor echoed through my phone speaker. It was Chloe, my sister-in-law. She was married to Malik's older brother, Marcus. Chloe was a wealthy white woman from a prominent family who never missed an opportunity to remind me of her status. Since the day Marcus brought her into our family, she had treated me with a thinly veiled condescension. She constantly threw microaggressions my way, making snide remarks about my natural hair, my demanding career, or how I did not fit the traditional mold of a submissive society wife. She loved playing the gracious savior, pretending to be inclusive, while subtly tearing me down at every family gathering. I sat frozen in my car, staring at the screen. Why was Chloe in my house while her husband was at work? And why was she pouring herself a glass of my expensive bourbon like she owned the place? Then Malik walked into the frame. He did not look like the supportive husband who had just kissed his hard-working wife goodbye. He walked straight up to Chloe, wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, and pulled her in for a kiss that made my stomach violently churn. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. 8 years of marriage, a beautiful daughter, a life we built together, and he was standing in our living room kissing his brother's wife. But the physical betrayal was only the beginning of the nightmare. I turned the volume up on my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I listened to every word they said. Chloe pulled back from the kiss, swirling the bourbon in her glass. She looked around my meticulously decorated living room with a look of pure disdain. She sighed dramatically, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Is she finally gone?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with venom. "Honestly, Malik, I do not understand how you endure the smell of cocoa butter in her hair for so long. It is so overpowering. And her whole independent boss woman routine is absolutely exhausting. She acts like she is better than everyone else just because she works on Wall Street level deals. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The blatant disrespect, the racist undertones, the sheer audacity of this woman standing in the house, my money paid for, insulting my culture and my hard work. I waited for Malik to defend me. I waited for the man who promised to protect me to tell her to shut her mouth. Instead, he laughed. A cold, calculating laugh I had never heard before. "It is almost done, baby," Malik replied, taking the glass from her hand and taking a sip. "You just have to be patient for a few more days." When this corporate restructuring contract is signed on Monday, the new holding company will take full control of her primary investment funds. I have the power of attorney paperwork mixed in with the tax documents she needs to sign. She trusts me completely. She will sign it without even reading the fine print. And once she does, she will not have a single penny left to her name. Everything she built will belong to us. My world stopped spinning and simply crashed. The air in the car suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Malik was not just having an affair with his brother's wife. They were conspiring to bankrupt me. They were plotting to steal the wealth I had sacrificed my blood, sweat, and tears to accumulate. All the late nights at the law firm, all the grueling negotiations, all the stress I endured to provide a luxurious life for my family. He was planning to hand it all over to Chloe. Chloe smiled, tracing her finger down Malik's chest. "Marcus is drowning in debt," she complained. "He thinks we can just keep borrowing against his trust fund, but the bank is threatening to foreclose on our estate. I refuse to be the laughingstock of the country club. I need that money, Malik. We need that money to buy the penthouse and finally leave these losers behind." "Do not worry," Malik said smoothly, pulling her close again. "By next week, Maya will be out on the street trying to figure out how she lost her empire. We will have the penthouse, the offshore accounts, and Marcus will be left holding the bag for his own debts. It is the perfect plan." I lowered my phone, the screen going dark. The silence of the garage wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. A lesser woman might have marched back into that house screaming and crying, demanding answers, throwing punches. A lesser woman would have let her emotions dictate her actions, giving them the satisfaction of calling her an angry, unstable, hysterical wife. But I am not a lesser woman. I am a senior financial attorney who navigates multi-million-dollar hostile takeovers for breakfast. Malik thought he was smart. He thought because I loved him, I was blind. He thought my demanding career made me ignorant to his financial maneuvers. What my arrogant husband did not know was that I had anticipated the possibility of financial betrayal years ago. When you grow up fighting for every single thing you have, you learn to build fortresses around your success. 3 years ago, when Malik first started acting overly interested in managing our joint assets, my instincts had kicked in. I quietly moved the core of my wealth, the vast majority of my corporate shares, my real estate holdings, and my primary investment accounts into an ironclad blind trust located in Delaware. The entity Malik thought he was restructuring was nothing more than a decoy account, a financial shell filled with toxic corporate debt that I had specifically isolated. If he tried to take control of it, he would not be inheriting my wealth. He would be legally assuming millions of dollars in corporate liabilities. I sat in the driver's seat, my heart rate slowly returning to a steady, rhythmic beat. The tears dried up before they even had a chance to fall. The man I loved died the second I heard that recording. In his place stood a parasite, a thief who thought he could feast on my success and feed it to a woman who looked down on my very existence. I started the engine of my SUV, the low rumble vibrating through the steering wheel. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed out of the driveway, heading toward the city. Let them have their afternoon in my house. Let them drink my bourbon and plot my downfall. They thought they were playing a game of checkers, moving pieces behind my back. They had no idea they had just stepped onto a chessboard where I controlled every single move. The trap was set, but it was not for me. It was for them. And I was going to make sure they lost absolutely everything. I forced my trembling finger to press the record button on my phone screen. The small red timer began to count upward, capturing every sickening syllable echoing from the living room camera. I sat in the suffocating stillness of my parked car, the premium leather seat suddenly feeling like a cage. My breath came in shallow, jagged gasps as I listened to the man I married dismantle my life with his brother's wife. I needed this evidence. I needed to document exactly who they were when they thought nobody was watching. As their voices filled the quiet space of my garage, a heavy reel of the last 8 years played in my mind. I had given Malik the best years of my life, my unwavering loyalty, and my absolute brilliance. When we first met, Malik was just a charming but struggling junior analyst drowning in debt and entirely reliant on his family name to get his foot in the door. I was the one who actually understood the market. I was the one who developed the aggressive investment strategies that initially doubled our portfolio. When we decided to launch our own boutique investment firm, I made the conscious decision to step back into the shadows and let him take the title of managing director. I told myself it was for the optics. I convinced myself that the traditional old money business world of Atlanta preferred dealing with a charismatic, well-spoken man. I fed his ego daily. I stayed up until 3 in the morning drafting the contracts, analyzing the risk factors, and securing the deals that he would later take the credit for at expensive networking lunches. I built the entire foundation of the empire he now paraded as his own. I had poured my entire soul into securing our financial future, completely blind to the fact that I was funding my own personal executioner. The audio from the monitor snapped my attention back to the present reality. Chloe's high-pitched whining voice grated against my ears as she continued to pace across my living room. She was complaining about Marcus Malik's older brother and her husband. It turned out that my highly esteemed brother-in-law, the man who always looked down his nose at me at family dinners, was completely bankrupt. Chloe wailed about their mounting liabilities with a mix of anger and desperation. They were millions of dollars in the hole, mortgaged to the absolute limit, just to maintain the grand illusion of their elite social status. The exorbitant private school tuitions for their children, the lavish country club memberships they constantly flaunted, the extravagant European vacations they plastered all over social media. It was all a massive rotting lie funded by aggressive credit lines they could no longer secure. And Malik, my devoted husband, was actively volunteering to be their personal savior. I listened in absolute horror as they meticulously outlined their strategy to use our company infrastructure to drain my assets. Malik was explaining how he planned to leverage the firm's authority to access the capital I had securely locked away. He wanted to quietly funnel massive sums of cash through a series of shell accounts directly into Marcus and Chloe's failing estate. He was literally planning to steal the money I had earned through grueling 80-hour work weeks to pay off the debts of people who despised me. I heard the clinking of ice in a glass as Chloe took another sip of my premium bourbon. She let out a short, mocking laugh that made my blood boil. "It is about time that money goes to people who actually know how to belong in society," Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with sheer venom. "I mean, honestly, Malik, what does a girl who grew up in the slums of South Atlanta know about wealth management anyway? She is just a glorified numbers cruncher. She does not have the pedigree for this kind of money. It is wasted on her." I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I waited for my husband to say something. I waited for the man who slept beside me every night. The man who knew exactly how hard my mother worked to get me out of that neighborhood to defend my honor. I waited for him to tell her to leave my house for disrespecting my roots. Instead, the garage was filled with the sound of his deep, amused chuckle. "You are right," Malik agreed smoothly, his voice devoid of any hesitation or guilt. "She is too focused on the spreadsheets to see the bigger picture. She has zero understanding of legacy or class. But you do not have to worry about her anymore. I have everything completely under control." The sheer audacity of his betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest. He was mocking the very work ethic that paid for the designer suits he wore and the luxury cars he drove. The racist and classist undertones of Chloe's insults were disgusting, but Malik's casual agreement was a knife straight to my heart. He viewed my background as a flaw, a convenient excuse to justify robbing me blind. They both saw me not as a human being, not as a brilliant attorney and a devoted wife, but simply as a temporary bank account they could exploit and discard. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as a single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. It was a tear, mourning the death of the life I thought I had. But the mourning period lasted exactly 3 seconds. The sorrow rapidly evaporated, entirely replaced by a cold, calculating rage that sharpened my focus to a razor edge. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to let a mediocre man and his entitled mistress strip me of my dignity and my wealth. Through the monitor, Chloe's voice dropped to a soft, conspiratorial whisper. How much longer, Malik? I cannot handle Marcus and his financial panic attacks for much longer. The bank sent another warning letter today. We need that capital infusion immediately. If we lose the estate, my family will never let me live it down. Do not worry, Malik replied, his tone radiating a sickeningly arrogant confidence. Next Monday is the final step. I have a massive stack of quarterly tax documents prepared for her to review. I slipped the transfer of representation rights right into the middle of the pile. You know how she gets when she is busy. She trusts my organizational skills completely. She will sign the transfer authorization without a second glance. Once her signature is on that specific document, I will have unilateral control over the primary trust fund. The money will be wired to your offshore holding account by Tuesday morning. Chloe let out a relieved sigh, the sound of her kissing his cheek amplifying through the phone. You are brilliant, she murmured. But what about tonight? What if she wants to look at the portfolio over the weekend? She is always obsessing over the accounts. Malik laughed again, a dark, manipulative sound that made me want to rip the steering wheel off the dashboard. Leave tonight to me, he said confidently. I am going to make a special dinner, pour her favorite wine, and keep her very happy. I will shower her with so much affection she will completely drop her guard. By the time Monday morning rolls around, she will be practically begging to sign whatever I put in front of her to get back to work. The audio feed continued, but I had heard more than enough. I reached out and tapped the red button, stopping the recording and saving the digital file to multiple secure cloud locations. I took a deep, steadying breath, inhaling the scent of the leather interior. I reached up and firmly wiped the single dried tear from my cheek. A cruel smile slowly appeared on my face. I turned off the engine, grabbed my leather briefcase, and stepped out of the SUV. The cool, damp air of the garage did little to chill the absolute fire currently burning through my veins. I paused for a fraction of a second with my hand on the doorknob, taking a deep, calculated breath. I smoothed the front of my tailored skirt, relaxed my jaw, and arranged my features into a mask of mild, flustered panic. I pushed open the heavy door leading directly into the kitchen, ensuring the lock clicked loudly behind me to serve as a deliberate warning shot. I practically jogged into the main living area, rummaging frantically through my bag and muttering under my breath about scattered contracts and impossible deadlines. Malik and Chloe had already physically separated, though the air between them still crackled with an undeniable guilty tension. Chloe was suddenly deeply fascinated by a modern, abstract sculpture resting on our marble mantel, while Malik was hastily adjusting the silver cufflinks of his crisp white shirt. Maya baby Malik said, his voice dropping an octave into that smooth, reassuring tone he reserved for soothing, anxious corporate clients and apparently his clueless wife. I thought you were halfway downtown to the financial district by now. I forced a breathless, exaggerated sigh, dropping my heavy briefcase onto the granite kitchen island with a loud thud. I thought I was too. I realized halfway down the street that I completely forgot the primary restructuring folder on the desk in my home office. It is an absolute disaster. I cannot walk into this meeting empty-handed. I looked up, feigning mild, polite surprise at the sight of my sister-in-law standing by the fireplace. Chloe, I did not realize you were stopping by today. Chloe turned slowly, swirling the last amber drop of my expensive bourbon in her crystal glass. She offered a tight, condescending smile that did not reach her eyes. Just dropping off some fabric swatches for the country club gala committee, she lied effortlessly, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Though seeing you rush back in such a frantic panic reminds me exactly why I chose to be a present, dedicated mother instead of a corporate workaholic. I simply could never bring myself to leave my precious children to be raised by a hired nanny just to chase another dollar. You really do miss the absolute best years of their lives when your head is constantly buried in financial spreadsheets and legal documents. The urge to cross the room and slap the crystal glass right out of her perfectly manicured hand was nearly overpowering. She was standing right in the middle of the luxury home, my spreadsheets paid for drinking the premium liquor my hard-earned dollars bought, actively plotting to steal the wealth I created, and having the sheer audacity to lecture me on maternal dedication. I took a slow, deep breath, burying the blinding fury beneath a thick layer of manufactured apologetic exhaustion. "We all make our different choices, Chloe," I replied, keeping my voice remarkably even and polite. "Someone has to keep the investment portfolios growing so the extended family can comfortably maintain their elevated lifestyles." Malik stepped quickly between us, playing his role perfectly. He placed a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder, acting as the gentle, stabilizing mediator. "Now, Chloe, do not be too hard on her. Maya is carrying a massive load right now for the firm, and she handles it beautifully. We are just incredibly lucky she is so dedicated to our future." He leaned down and kissed my temple, his lips feeling like pure corrosive poison against my skin. "Go grab your file, sweetheart. I will see Chloe out so you can get back on the road." I nodded gratefully, playing the part of the tired, appreciative, innocent wife to absolute perfection. I hurried up the curved staircase to my home office, grabbing a random thick folder off the mahogany desk just to complete the visual prop. By the time I walked back down the stairs, the heavy front door was clicking shut. Chloe was finally gone. Malik turned around and leaned casually against the doorframe, giving me that devastating, charming smile that had once made my heart race with genuine affection. Now looking at him only made my stomach violently churn. He walked over, wrapped his strong arms securely around my waist, and pulled me flush against his chest. "I hate seeing you so stressed and overworked," he murmured, his breath warm and familiar against my neck. "You work entirely too hard for us. Let me make it up to you tonight. I am going to cook your absolute favorite pan-seared sea bass, open that vintage Cabernet we brought back from our Napa Valley trip, and just completely spoil you. You just focus on surviving this afternoon meeting and leave the entire romantic weekend to me." "That sounds perfect," I lied smoothly, resting my head against his chest and closing my eyes. I could hear his heart beating, a steady, calm rhythm of a man who firmly believed he had outsmarted everyone, a man who thought he was the most brilliant player in the game. "I will be home by 6 o'clock sharp. I love you." "I love you more," he whispered back, kissing the top of my head. He released me, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze, and announced he was going to jump in the shower to freshen up before starting the dinner preparations. I stood by the kitchen island and watched him walk upstairs, listening intently until I heard the bathroom door close and the shower water begin hitting the porcelain tile. The exact moment the water started running, my entire demeanor changed. The exhausted, easily manipulated wife completely vanished, immediately replaced by the sharp, calculating senior attorney who destroyed corporate rivals for a living. I did not head for the front door to leave for my fake meeting. Instead, I turned and walked silently down the hallway into Malik's private study. His sleek silver laptop sat open on his immaculate desk, the screen dark and locked. Malik was incredibly arrogant. He truly believed his digital security was impenetrable because he had a basic understanding of encryption. But when you are married to a woman who routinely untangles complex corporate espionage for multinational conglomerates, a basic user password is nothing more than a momentary, laughable inconvenience. I had cracked his numeric access code 3 years ago when I first suspected he was mismanaging our joint checking accounts to cover his excessive personal spending. It was an embarrassingly predictable combination of his fraternity founding year and Chloe's birth date. I typed the digits in rapidly, my fingers flying across the keyboard without making a sound. The screen immediately illuminated, revealing his email inbox and a series of minimized document windows. I bypassed the decoy folders he had set up on his desktop to mimic his daily administrative workload and navigated straight to a hidden directory buried deep within his system files. I clicked open the restricted folder labeled Restructuring Initiative. The digital documents inside confirmed absolutely everything I had just heard on the baby monitor. There were the fraudulent shell company registrations, the offshore account routing numbers based in the Cayman Islands, and the meticulously drafted power of attorney form disguised as a standard quarterly tax acknowledgement. He had planned it perfectly. He was going to slip that specific form into a massive stack of legitimate mind-numbing paperwork on Monday morning, banking on my chronic fatigue and my absolute trust in him to prevent me from reading the fine print. Once my signature was on that line, he would have unilateral legal control over the primary trust fund, holding the vast majority of my liquid assets. But as I scrolled further down the directory, ensuring I had copied every file to my secure external drive, a separate heavily encrypted subfolder caught my eye. It was simply titled Buckhead Horizon. I ran a quick decryption script I always kept on my flash drive, bypassed the secondary lock, and clicked it open. The breath caught sharply in my throat, freezing in my lungs. This was not just a pathetic plan to funnel cash into Marcus's failing accounts to save his brother's estate from foreclosure. That was just a fraction of the grand, sickening design. Staring back at me from the bright screen were the finalized, legally binding purchase agreements for a $6 million luxury penthouse in the most exclusive high-security high-rise in downtown Atlanta. I scanned the buyer details, my eyes scanning the text rapidly. The buyer listed on the contract was not Malik. It was not a joint corporate entity. The sole owner listed on the deed was Chloe. My mind raced as the puzzle pieces slammed into place. They were not just stealing my money to cover family debts and save face at the country club. They were utilizing my life savings to purchase their very own private sanctuary, a glittering multi-million-dollar palace in the sky, where they could freely flaunt their stolen wealth and live out their twisted, adulterous fantasy without any financial worries. Malik was buying his brother's wife a mansion with my money, planning to leave me completely destitute while they lived in absolute luxury. I stared at the bright screen, the staggering numbers, and the cold legal jargon burning themselves permanently into my memory. He was going to feed me pan-seared sea bass and pour me vintage wine tonight, holding my hand and acting the part of the devoted, loving husband, while the finalized paperwork to buy his mistress a penthouse sat quietly on his hard drive waiting for my stolen signature to fund it. I carefully closed the files, ran a scrubbing program to completely clear the digital footprint of my access, and locked the screen, leaving the silver laptop in the exact position I had found it. The sound of the shower upstairs abruptly stopped. The water was off. I picked up my leather briefcase, ensuring the random prop folder was tucked neatly inside, and walked silently out the front door, pulling it shut with a soft click. As I climbed back into my SUV and finally started the engine, a cold, ruthless, and terrifyingly absolute calm settled over my entire being. The game was no longer just about protecting my financial assets and securing my future. It was about absolute, total, and uncompromising annihilation. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Atlanta was bathed in the warm, golden glow of thousands of crystal chandeliers. The annual Heritage Trust Gala was the absolute crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was an exclusive, highly curated gathering of the most affluent, influential African-American families in the entire South. Generations of established wealth, political power, and corporate dominance were packed into one sprawling room, sipping vintage champagne and discussing multi-million-dollar philanthropic pledges. And then there was Chloe. She was gliding through the sea of black excellence like a self-appointed queen wearing a silver sequined gown that cost more than most people earned in a decade. She practically vibrated with a desperate, pathetic need to be the absolute center of attention. Despite simply marrying into my husband's family, she consistently treated these deeply cultural events as her own personal condescending charity projects. She loved playing the gracious, enlightened white savior to a room full of brilliant people who collectively owned half the commercial real estate in the city. I walked into the grand foyer wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that cascaded perfectly to the floor. My hair was flawlessly styled, my makeup immaculate, and my posture radiating the absolute terrifying calm of a woman who held every single winning card in the deck. Malik walked right beside me, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored velvet tuxedo, playing the part of the devoted, supportive partner to absolute perfection. Before we could even hand our gilded invitation tickets to the usher at the main entrance, Chloe intercepted us. She marched over with a gold-plated clipboard in her hand, a frantic, highly exaggerated look of distress plastered across her face. "Maya, darling," Chloe announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the surrounding couples waiting in the reception line. "We have had a massive logistical emergency with the seating chart. It is an absolute nightmare." I maintained a pleasant, perfectly neutral expression. "Is that right?" Chloe sighed heavily, tapping her manicured fingernail against the clipboard. "The primary donor tables are completely overbooked. The governor just confirmed his attendance, and we had to severely shift the arrangement to accommodate his security detail. I placed Marcus Malik and myself at the Platinum VIP table directly next to the podium. We are the official hosts for that section, you know. But I had to move your seat, Maya. You are at table 42. I did not need to look at the master seating chart to know exactly where table 42 was located. It was the absolute worst seat in the entire ballroom. It was a small, cramped table shoved into the dark back corner of the room, positioned directly next to the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen, where the event coordinators, the administrative staff, and the exhausted volunteers sat. It was a deliberate, calculated, and deeply public demotion. "I see," I said softly, my voice giving absolutely nothing away. Chloe offered a tight, patronizing smile, reaching out to pat my arm as if comforting a slow child. "Do not take it personally, Maya. It is just that you work with transparent computers and boring financial spreadsheets all day. You certainly are not used to networking with these major high-net-worth donors. It takes a specific type of charm. We need true elegance and delicacy at the front table to secure these massive financial pledges tonight. The VIP table requires a level of sophisticated communication that you just do not have the background for." The sheer blinding audacity of her statement hung in the air. She was standing in front of a senior financial attorney who regularly negotiated international corporate mergers, telling me I lacked the sophistication to speak to the very same venture capitalists I went to battle with on a weekly basis. She was calling me uncultured to my face, entirely confident that her white privilege and her husband family name made her untouchable. I turned my head slightly and looked directly at Malik. I waited for the facade of the loving husband to kick in. I waited for him to step up, defend his wife, and tell his sister-in-law that we were a unified team who sat together, or we did not sit at all. Instead, Malik let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. He placed a heavy, warm hand on my lower back, offering me a look of mild irritation. "Do not make a fuss tonight," Maya, Malik said, his voice dropping into a patronizing whisper. "Chloe has been incredibly stressed organizing the silent auction and managing the guest list. Just go along with it gently. Be a team player for once. Do not embarrass us by making a scene over a chair. Just take one for the team tonight, baby." I looked at the man who had secretly drafted power of attorney papers to bankrupt me. I looked at the man who had a finalized purchase agreement for a $6 million penthouse for his mistress currently sitting on his encrypted hard drive. He actually thought I was going to throw a tantrum. He thought I was going to cry, argue, or storm out of the hotel, proving Chloe point that I was an angry, uncultured woman who did not know how to behave in polite society. They both wanted me to react emotionally so they could justify their quiet, shared contempt for me. I smiled. It was a radiant, stunning, and completely hollow smile. "Of course," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "I completely understand the logistical pressure, Chloe. You three have a wonderful time at the front. I will find my way to my table." Chloe blinked, momentarily thrown entirely off balance by my immediate, graceful surrender. She had armed herself for a vicious argument and found herself punching dead air. "Excellent," she stammered quickly, recovering her smug composure. "Enjoy the dinner, Maya." Malik kissed my cheek, completely oblivious to the venom currently coursing through my veins, and offered his arm to Chloe. I watched them walk away together toward the brightly lit center of the ballroom, laughing intimately as they approached the platinum tables. I turned on my heel and walked the opposite direction, navigating through the maze of tables until I reached the dimly lit back corner near the kitchen doors. Table 42 was exactly as humiliating as intended. I sat down next to an exhausted sound technician and a very polite woman managing the coat check. I ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime and settled into my chair. What Chloe and Malik completely failed to realize was that putting me in the shadows gave me the absolute best tactical vantage point in the entire room. I could see everything. More importantly, Table 42 was positioned directly adjacent to the heavy velvet curtains that separated the main ballroom from the private members, only cigar lounge and scotch bar. It was the quiet, secluded area where the truly powerful men and women retreated to escape the loud music, avoid the obnoxious socialites like Chloe, and conduct actual unregulated business. About an hour into the incredibly tedious speeches, the velvet curtains parted. Three older, distinguished men stepped out of the private lounge and stood near the edge of my table, seeking a quiet spot away from the deafening applause. I recognized them instantly. It was Richard Sterling, the CEO of a massive commercial real estate conglomerate, accompanied by two senior board members of the largest venture capital firm in the state. These were the exact three men Malik had been desperately trying to secure as primary investors for our boutique firm for the last 6 months. Malik needed their capital to mask the massive financial hole he and Marcus were actively digging. The men stood with their backs partially turned to me, swirling their expensive scotch, completely ignoring the gala proceeding on the main stage. "I am telling you, Richard," one of the board members groaned, taking a sip of his drink. "The man is an absolute clown. I cannot take another one of his pitch meetings. He is all flash expensive suits and absolutely zero substance." Sterling let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You are talking about Malik, right? It is embarrassing. Did you see those projected risk assessments he sent over to my office on Tuesday? The mathematics were completely flawed. A first-year business student could see the glaring holes in his portfolio strategy. He operates like a man who is desperate for cash, not a man looking to build sustainable wealth." The third man nodded in agreement. "The only reason his firm even survived its first 2 years is because of his wife. Maya is the one with the actual brains. She drafted the original corporate restructuring for my acquisitions team 3 years ago. She is brilliant, terrifyingly precise. If she were the one pitching us the new fund, I would sign the check tonight. But dealing with Malik is like dealing with a child playing dress-up in his father's suit. I am officially declining his proposal on Monday morning. We are not trusting our capital to a man who cannot even explain his own spreadsheets." I sat perfectly still, listening to the absolute destruction of my husband's professional reputation straight from the mouths of the men he worshipped. Malik was failing. He was failing spectacularly, and his desperation to steal my money was directly tied to the fact that the legitimate business world saw right through his charming hollow facade. Chloe thought seating me at the back of the room would silence me. She thought keeping me away from the bright lights would render me completely powerless. She was spectacularly wrong. The back of the room was where the real predators waited. I placed my glass of sparkling water down on the table. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald gown, stood up, and took 2 deliberate steps toward the group of men. I arranged my features into a look of pleasant, confident surprise. It was time to completely sever Malik's final professional lifeline, and I was going to do it with a smile. The satisfaction of that brief, lethal conversation with Richard Sterling still thrummed in my veins as the morning sun filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of our kitchen. The venture capitalists had been more than receptive to my subtle, highly confidential suggestion that my firm was preparing to spin off a new, independently managed asset division. They practically tripped over themselves, handing me their private contact information, leaving Malik completely out of the equation. Now it was Sunday morning. I stood at the marble island, slowly stirring a cup of Earl Grey tea, waiting for my husband to make his appearance. Malik strolled into the kitchen, wearing his expensive cashmere lounge pants, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and projecting the aura of a man completely at peace with the world. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, offering me a lazy, satisfied smile. "We need to talk about last night," I said, keeping my voice carefully modulated to sound hurt rather than furious. "You stood right there in the foyer of the St. Regis and let Chloe publicly humiliate me in front of the most influential families in Atlanta." You actually laughed with her, Malik. You told me to take one for the team. Malik sighed, rolling his eyes as he took a slow sip of his coffee. His entire demeanor immediately shifted into a posture of exhausted patience. Maya, please do not start this drama so early in the morning. I am exhausted. You are completely overreacting to a minor seating adjustment. It was not a minor adjustment, I countered, playing the role of the wounded, emotional wife he expected me to be. She shoved me next to the kitchen doors and told me I lacked the sophistication to speak to our own donors. She insulted my background and my career, and my husband agreed with her. Malik set his mug down on the granite with a sharp clink, stepping closer to loom over me. His voice dropped into that dark, manipulative tone he used whenever he wanted to twist reality to suit his narrative. You are always doing this, Maya. You are always playing the victim. Chloe was stressed out of her mind trying to organize a massive charity gala, and you made it all about your bruised ego. You have this massive inferiority complex because of where you grew up, and you project it onto her. I stared at him, letting my eyes widen in manufactured disbelief. An inferiority complex. I built the very firm you run. And there it is, Malik snapped, pointing a finger at me. Always keeping score, always aggressive. You harbor this deep, unjustified prejudice against Chloe simply because she is white and comes from a different social pedigree. You resent her ease, her grace, and the fact that she does not have to act like a corporate bulldog to get what she wants. She bent over backward to try and include you in the host committee, and you just sat in the back of the room pouting like a petulant child. It was embarrassing. The sheer psychological manipulation was breathtaking. If I had not listened to the baby monitor yesterday, if I had not seen the $6 million penthouse deed with Chloe, name on it, his words might have actually planted a seed of doubt in my mind. He was weaponizing my race, my work ethic, and my childhood struggles to paint me as an unstable, aggressive woman bullying his poor, fragile sister-in-law. He was laying the psychological groundwork to justify leaving me. He wanted me to feel so unbalanced and guilty that I would gladly sign those trust fund documents tomorrow morning just to prove my devotion to him. You really think I am jealous of her? I asked, letting my voice waver perfectly. I think you are deeply insecure, Malik replied, his tone softening into a sickeningly fake sympathy. He reached out and stroked my cheek. I love you, Maya, but your aggressive nature makes things incredibly difficult for this family. You made Chloe cry last night after you stormed off. She felt terrible. You need to apologize to her today to keep the peace. Marcus is furious. Before I could even formulate a response to that absolute garbage, the front doorbell chimed. It was not a polite ring, but a sharp, demanding series of buzzes. Malik patted my shoulder and walked to the foyer, opening the heavy oak doors. Marcus and Chloe swept into my home as if they owned the very foundation it sat upon. Marcus, a man currently millions of dollars in debt and facing imminent financial ruin, puffed his chest out in a ridiculous display of unearned alpha male dominance. Chloe trailed slightly behind him, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and clutching a tissue. She had completely bypassed subtle and gone straight for the full theatrical performance of a wounded, fragile victim. Malik Marcus barked, his voice echoing loudly off the vaulted ceilings. I am only here because Chloe insisted we try to clear the air, but I am absolutely not going to tolerate my wife being bullied by yours. Malik held his hands up in a placating gesture. I know, Marcus. I was just talking to Maya about her behavior. Come into the kitchen. They walked in a unified front of absolute toxicity. Chloe removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were miraculously completely dry, despite the tissue clutched in her fist. She looked at me with a tragic, trembling pout, while a victorious, vicious smirk danced at the very corners of her mouth. Maya. Chloe whispered, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. I just do not understand what I did to make you hate me so much. I have tried so incredibly hard to be a good sister to you. I put you on the platinum host list, and I only moved your seat because the governor's security team explicitly demanded it. And you just glared at me and stormed away. It broke my heart. I barely slept last night. She dabbed at her perfectly dry cheek, leaning into Marcus for support. Marcus wrapped a protective arm around her delicate shoulders, glaring at me with utter contempt. You owe my wife a massive apology, Maya Marcus demanded. She volunteers her time to elevate this family's social standing, and you treat her like dirt because you cannot handle the fact that she knows how to operate in these circles better than you do. You are tearing this family apart with your petty, childish jealousy. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the marble island. I looked at Marcus, a man who was actively conspiring with his brother to steal my life savings to pay off his bad debts. I looked at Chloe, a woman who was currently sleeping with my husband and planning to move into a luxury penthouse funded by my sweat and blood. And finally, I looked at Malik. Malik crossed his arms, staring at me with a heavy, disappointed glare. Do the right thing, Maya, he commanded softly. Apologize to Chloe. Fix this. Show me you can actually be a supportive part of this family. The silence in the kitchen was heavy thick with their collective arrogance. They had me surrounded in my own home, bullying me, gaslighting me, and demanding my submission. They expected me to break. They expected me to argue, to yell, to defend myself, which would only further prove their narrative that I was unhinged. Instead, I reached deep inside myself and pulled out a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I lowered my gaze, letting my shoulders slump ever so slightly. I took a shaky breath, forcing a look of profound, ashamed realization onto my face. You are right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Chloe blinked, her theatrical tears instantly stalling. Malik dropped his arms, looking marginally surprised by how quickly I had folded. I looked up, meeting Chloe's eyes with an expression of total, utter defeat. I am so incredibly sorry, Chloe. I let my own insecurities get the absolute best of me last night. You worked so hard on the gala, and it was beautiful. I felt out of place, and I unfairly took that frustration out on you. It was unprofessional, it was unkind, and it was completely unacceptable. I promise you, it will never, ever happen again. The sheer danger lurking beneath my words went completely undetected by the three predators in the room. When I promised it would never happen again, I meant it literally. They would never have the opportunity to humiliate me again because they were about to lose everything. Chloe's face broke into a massive, triumphant smile. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a suffocating, perfume-drenched hug. Oh, Maya, she cooed in my ear. I forgive you. We are family. I just want us to be close. I patted her back lightly, my expression completely dead, as I stared over her shoulder at the stainless steel refrigerator. I'm glad we cleared the air, I murmured. Marcus clapped Malik on the shoulder, letting out a loud, obnoxious laugh. See? That is all it takes, a little humility. We should all hit the club for Sunday brunch to celebrate keeping the family together. My treat. Malik smiled brilliantly, the tension completely leaving his body. He truly believed he had won. He believed I was thoroughly broken, completely manageable, and absolutely ready to sign away my trust fund tomorrow morning. Sounds perfect, Marcus. Maya, baby, why do not you stay here and rest? You look exhausted. We will be back in a few hours. That sounds wonderful, I agreed meekly. I have some emails to catch up on anyway. Enjoy brunch. I stood in the foyer and waved as the three of them walked out the front door, laughing and joking as they climbed into Marcus' luxury sedan. I watched the car disappear down the manicured street. The moment they were out of sight, the submissive broken wife vanished into thin air. I turned around, my spine snapping straight, my jaw setting into a hard, unforgiving line. I walked briskly back to my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I bypassed my standard work computer and pulled a prepaid burner phone from the hidden compartment in the back of my desk drawer. I punched in a highly unlisted number I had memorized late last night. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Diane Sterling office. How may I direct your call? This is Maya. I am calling to confirm my 2 o'clock appointment with Diane today. Diane Sterling was not just a lawyer. She was the absolute apex predator of high-asset divorce and financial litigation in the state of Georgia. She was notoriously ruthless, famously expensive, and coincidentally, the older sister of Richard Sterling, the venture capitalist whose firm I had just secured last night. Yes, Maya, the assistant replied warmly. Diane is expecting you at the private downtown office. She has already reviewed the preliminary digital files you sent over via the secure server this morning. She mentioned she is very much looking forward to dismantling them. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Perfect, I replied. Tell her I am bringing the rest of the documentation. It is time to start the fire. The opportunity to strike the match came exactly 3 days later at our mandatory Thursday evening family dinner. The venue was Aria, a breathtakingly pretentious Michelin-starred restaurant in Buckhead, where securing a reservation required either a minor miracle or a highly recognizable last name. Malik parents Arthur and Eleanor insisted on these weekly gatherings to project the image of a tightly knit, incredibly successful dynasty. Arthur was a retired Superior Court judge with a booming voice, and Eleanor was a classic Southern society matron who had perfected the art of delivering devastating insults wrapped in sweet maternal concern. I arrived exactly on time, taking my seat next to Malik at the long candlelit table. My husband played the part of the doting partner, flawlessly pulling out my chair and kissing my cheek, completely oblivious to the fact that Diane Sterling and her team of forensic accountants were currently tearing his offshore financial infrastructure to absolute shreds. 10 minutes later, Marcus and Chloe made their grand entrance. Every head in the private dining alcove turned. Chloe was wearing a simple, sleek black cocktail dress, but nobody was looking at the fabric. They were entirely focused on her neck. Resting against her collarbone was a magnificent, blinding cascade of brilliant cut diamonds. It was a vintage Cartier piece, heavy, ostentatious, and undeniably breathtaking. Eleanor literally gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Chloe, darling, that is the most spectacular thing I have ever laid eyes on. Chloe touched the stones lightly, feigning a modest blush. Marcus just spoils me absolutely rotten, Eleanor. We were celebrating our anniversary a little early, and he simply insisted I have it. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my eyes tracking the way the light caught the diamonds. I did not need an appraisal to know the exact value of that necklace. It was exactly $150,000. I knew that specific number because I had spent my morning reviewing the wire transfers Malik had authorized from our joint corporate reserve account last Tuesday, under the guise of an emergency legal retainer fee for a shell corporation. Malik had not just bought his mistress a $6 million penthouse. He was actively financing her jewelry collection, while Marcus stood there deeply in debt, grinning like a fool and taking the credit. The dinner progressed in its usual agonizing fashion. Chloe dominated the conversation, steering every topic back to her new jewelry, her country club committee, and the various European vacations they were supposedly planning. I remained perfectly composed, contributing just enough to the conversation to avoid appearing sullen, while internally calculating the exact moment I would watch this entire charade burn to ash. As the waiter cleared our main courses to prepare for dessert, Chloe let out a sudden irritated sigh. She reached up and unclasped the heavy diamond necklace. The clasp is catching terribly on the baby hairs at the nape of my neck, she complained, rubbing the skin. It is giving me an absolute rash. I am just going to take it off for the rest of the dinner. Arthur chuckled. A very expensive problem to have, my dear. Put it safely in your purse. My clutch is far too small, Chloe replied, holding up a tiny crystal-embellished evening bag. Maya, be a dear and pass me my coat. I will just slip it into the interior zippered pocket. Our coats had been taken by the hostess upon arrival, but the private dining room had its own freestanding coat rack positioned directly behind my chair. My tailored black cashmere overcoat was hanging right next to Malik's identical black cashmere overcoat. Chloe's camel-colored trench coat hung on the opposite side. I did not move a muscle. I simply turned my head and looked at her. You have legs, Chloe. You can get it yourself. Eleanor let out a sharp, disapproving breath. Maya, there is absolutely no need to be hostile. She simply asked for a favor. Malik placed a firm hand on my thigh under the table, squeezing hard enough to leave a bruise. Maya, please, he warned quietly. I held my ground, offering Eleanor a cool, serene smile. I am simply enjoying my water, Eleanor. I am not the coat check girl. Chloe let out a long, exaggerated sigh of martyrdom. She stood up, brushing past my chair, and walked over to the coat rack. I watched her reflection in the dark glass of the restaurant window. I saw her slip the heavy diamond necklace into a pocket, pat it down, and return to her seat with a smug, satisfied expression. Dessert arrived, a decadent array of chocolate soufflés and raspberry tarts. The conversation shifted to Arthur's upcoming golf tournament. I checked my watch. We had been at the table for nearly 2 hours, and my patience for this theatrical performance was rapidly expiring. Suddenly, Chloe stood up again, pushing her chair back with a loud, disruptive scrape against the hardwood floor. She walked over to the coat rack to retrieve her phone from her trench coat. The entire table watched as she patted down her pockets. Her movements, initially casual, suddenly became frantic. She began pulling the fabric inside out, her face draining of color. Marcus stood up, tossing his napkin onto the table. "Chloe, what is wrong?" "It is gone," Chloe whispered, her voice rising into a sharp, hysterical pitch. "The necklace. It is not in my pocket. It is completely gone." The private dining room erupted into chaos. Arthur immediately signaled for the restaurant manager while Eleanor rushed over to help Chloe frantically search the floor around the coat rack. Malik stood up, his face a mask of deep concern, helping Marcus pull the coats off the rack to shake them out. I remained seated, finishing the last bite of my raspberry tart, watching the panic unfold with absolute clinical detachment. "It has to be here," Marcus insisted, his voice tight with genuine panic. A man drowning in debt could not afford to lose a $150,000 asset, even if he did not actually pay for it. "Nobody else has been in this room except the waiters." Chloe suddenly stopped searching. She slowly turned around, her eyes locking directly onto me. The manufactured panic on her face vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating malice. She had found her angle. "Nobody else has been in this room," Chloe echoed loudly, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "But Maya has been sitting directly in front of those coats all night." The entire room fell dead silent. Even the restaurant manager, who had just rushed through the doors, froze in his tracks. "Chloe, what are you saying?" Arthur demanded, his heavy brows drawing together in shock. "I am saying that Maya has been glaring at my necklace with pure, unadulterated envy since the second I walked into this restaurant," Chloe spat, stepping toward me. She refused to hand me my coat earlier because she was already plotting. She sat there waiting for us to get distracted by dessert, and she reached back and took it. I slowly wiped my mouth with my linen napkin and placed it neatly next to my plate. "That is quite an accusation, Chloe." "It is the truth," she shrieked, playing the hysterical victim flawlessly. "She has always been jealous of me. She resents everything Marcus and I have. You can take the girl out of the South Atlanta slums, but you clearly cannot take the slum culture out of the girl. Old habits die hard, do they not, Maya? If you see something you cannot afford, you just steal it." Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, staring at me as if I had just morphed into a violent criminal right in front of her salad plate. Arthur shook his head in profound, utter disgust. I looked at my husband. I waited for Malik to shut this down. I waited for him to tell his mistress that accusing his wife of grand larceny was a step too far. Malik walked over to my chair and looked down at me with an expression of deep, tragic disappointment. "Maya," he said, his voice dripping with condescending sorrow, "if you took it just to teach her a lesson about flaunting wealth, or because you were feeling insecure, just give it back right now. We will handle this quietly. We will not press charges. Just return the necklace, baby, and we can get you the psychiatric help you clearly need." He was handing me the rope and demanding I hang myself. He wanted me to take the fall to look like a jealous, thieving, unstable woman, completely destroying my credibility with his parents while protecting Chloe. I stood up, slowly pushing my chair back. I smoothed the front of my emerald gown and looked directly at the restaurant manager. "Sir, I would like you to call the police immediately. We have an accusation of grand larceny, and I want a full documented search conducted by law enforcement." Chloe's face paled slightly, but she stood her ground. "You do not need the police to search your bag, Maya. Turn your purse over right now." I picked up my small black leather clutch and unzipped it. I turned it upside down and shook it out over the center of the dining table. A tube of lipstick, a compact mirror, my car keys, and my credit card clattered against the wood. "No diamonds. Check her coat," Marcus demanded, aggressively stepping forward. I gestured gracefully toward the coat rack. "Be my guest, Marcus. My coat is the black cashmere one on the left. The restaurant manager stepped in, eager to de-escalate the situation before the police arrived. "Allow me, sir," he said politely. He picked up my black overcoat and methodically checked the left and right pockets, turning them inside out. He checked the interior lining. Nothing. He held it up, shaking his head. "The coat is empty, ma'am." Chloe's eyes darted frantically around the room. She was visibly sweating now. The confident racist accuser was rapidly disintegrating into a panicked, cornered animal. "It has to be there," she insisted, her voice shrill. "I know she took it. Check the other coats. She probably hid it in someone else's pocket to throw us off." The manager sighed, picking up the camel trench coat. Empty. He then reached for the final coat on the rack. It was the other black cashmere overcoat, identical to mine in almost every way, except for the broader shoulders and the custom silk lining. It was Malik's coat. The manager slipped his hand into the deep right side pocket. He froze. The entire room stopped breathing. Slowly, the manager pulled his hand out. Dangling from his fingers, catching the low light of the chandeliers and practically blinding everyone in the room, was the vintage Cartier diamond necklace. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening, and completely beautiful. Arthur stared at the necklace, his mouth hanging open in shock. Eleanor let out a strangled, horrified noise. Marcus looked at his brother as if he had never seen him before in his entire life. And Malik looked like the floor had just dropped out from underneath him. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He stared at the diamonds dangling from the manager's hand, his mind desperately short-circuiting as he tried to process how his mistress' necklace had ended up in his coat pocket. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Chloe, blinded by her own malicious intent and rushing back from the restroom to plant the stolen necklace on me, had reached for the black cashmere coat draped over the chair. In her panicked haste to frame me, she had completely failed to realize she was stuffing the diamonds into the pocket of her lover coat, not mine. Marcus whispered, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with a brotherly rage that had been brewing for decades. "Why is my wife's necklace in your coat pocket?" "I did not," Malik stammered, holding his hands up, taking a panicked step back. "I have no idea how that got in there. I swear to you, Marcus, I did not touch it. Maya must have planted it there to frame me." I let out a soft, melodic laugh. It cut through the heavy tension in the room like a silver blade. "Oh, Malik," I said, my voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom, "do not insult our intelligence. We all know I have not moved from this chair all night. I did not touch the coats. Chloe did." I stepped closer to Chloe, invading her personal space, watching her tremble as the reality of her colossal failure crushed her. "You were in such a rush to play the victim, Chloe," I whispered, ensuring every single person in the room could hear me. "You were so desperate to brand me a thief from the slums that you could not even tell the difference between my coat and the coat of the man you are sleeping with." Eleanor screamed, a genuine, horrified, high-pitched scream. Arthur grabbed the edge of the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Marcus physically recoiled, looking between his wife and his brother with dawning absolute horror. "That is a lie," Chloe sobbed, stepping behind Marcus. "She is lying, Marcus. She is just trying to destroy our family." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen twice and pulled up the digital deed to the Buckhead Horizon penthouse, holding it up so Marcus could clearly see the $6 million purchase agreement, with his wife's name listed as the sole owner, funded by Malik corporate accounts. "I am not destroying this family, Marcus," I said, my voice cold, calm, and absolutely victorious. "I am simply turning on the lights. Enjoy your dessert." I picked up my black cashmere coat, slipped it over my shoulders, and walked out of the private dining room, leaving the absolute ruins of their elite, arrogant dynasty burning to the ground behind me. The morning sunlight spilled across the white marble countertops of my kitchen, casting long, peaceful shadows across the room. The absolute silence of the house was a stark, beautiful contrast to the explosive, apocalyptic devastation I had unleashed at the St. Regis just 12 hours prior. I stood perfectly still, savoring the rich aroma of my dark roast coffee, feeling the cool ceramic of the mug against my palms. I was waiting. I knew the psychology of a cornered narcissist better than anyone. and I knew exactly what Malik would do next. The heavy front door clicked open. The sound of his leather dress shoes echoing in the foyer was entirely devoid of its usual confident swagger. Malik walked into the kitchen looking like a man who had survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. His designer tuxedo from the night before was rumpled, his tie was missing, and the dark, heavy circles under his eyes spoke volumes about the sleepless, panicked night he had spent trying to manage the fallout of his exposed affair. Yet despite the absolute ruin of his personal life, his hands gripped his leather briefcase with a white-knuckled intensity. He set it down on the kitchen island, his eyes darting toward me, with a mixture of apprehension and desperate calculating greed. Maya, he began, his voice hoarse, attempting to summon the smooth, persuasive tone that had entirely lost its magic. I know last night was unforgivable. I know what you saw, and I know I have a lifetime of explaining and apologizing to do. I am going to end it with Chloe today. I swear to you. But right now, we have to compartmentalize our personal tragedy from the financial survival of our firm. I took a slow, measured sip of my coffee, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. I simply raised a single eyebrow, inviting him to continue digging his own grave. He eagerly unlatched the briefcase and pulled out a massive, intimidating stack of legal documents bound by heavy brass clips. He slid the folder across the marble island toward me. The bold black letters on the cover page read, "Corporate Restructuring Initiative." The rumors about the gala are already spreading through the financial district, Malik said, leaning his hands flat on the counter to emphasize his manufactured urgency. The venture capitalists you spoke to last night are going to want a clear, untangled operating structure before they commit a single dollar to us. Furthermore, with a potential separation looming between us, the capital gains tax on our shared portfolios is going to be absolutely catastrophic. This document is a standard corporate restructuring. It is a vital tax reduction procedure designed to shelter our liquid assets and protect the firm capital from any immediate legal audits. I looked down at the thick stack of paper. It was a masterpiece of legal deception. To a standard observer or an exhausted, heartbroken wife, it looked exactly like a routine tax mitigation strategy. But my eyes were trained to spot the predatory traps hidden in the fine print. I reached out and slowly opened the folder, my manicured finger tracing the dense paragraphs of legal jargon. Buried deep within the fourth section, deliberately obscured by complex clauses regarding corporate tax liabilities, was the lethal mechanism. It was a complete, irrevocable transfer of all voting rights, asset management, and executive control of our primary investment firm to a newly formed holding company. I recognized the name of the holding company instantly. It was the exact offshore entity I had found heavily encrypted on his laptop. The entity meant to fund Chloe's $6 million penthouse. He was actually doing it. Even after I had exposed his affair, completely humiliated his mistress, and destroyed his reputation in front of the entire Atlanta elite, his boundless pathological arrogance convinced him he could still win. He truly believed I was currently so blinded by emotional devastation that I would blindly sign away my entire life savings just to salvage the business. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen resting next to the folder. I held it between my fingers, letting the cold metal ground me. As I stared at the signature line, a vivid, rushing montage of their betrayal played in my mind. I heard Chloe's shrill, elitist voice echoing through the baby monitor, mocking my roots and calling me a glorified numbers cruncher. I heard Malik's deep, amused chuckle as he agreed that I lacked class and pedigree. I saw the triumphant, venomous smirk on Chloe's face right before the restaurant manager pulled her stolen diamond necklace out of Malik's coat pocket. They saw me as nothing more than a temporary bank account, a useful tool to be exploited and discarded the moment it became inconvenient. I looked up at Malik. My expression was perfectly arranged into a mask of weary, heartbroken resignation. "Are you absolutely certain this is the best way to protect our assets?" Malik, I asked, letting my voice waver with just the right amount of vulnerability. His eyes lit up with a ravenous, predatory gleam. He could practically taste the millions of dollars. He reached across the island, placing his hand over mine in a sickening display of false comfort. I promise you, Maya, this is the only way to save what we have built. Just sign the transfer and I will handle the rest. You will never have to worry about a single financial burden again. I smiled softly. I know I will not. I lowered the gold pen and signed my name with a smooth, decisive flourish on every single required line. I initialed the annexes, dated the transfer, and pushed the heavy folder back across the marble island. The transformation in Malik was instantaneous and terrifying. The second the folder was back in his possession, the fake comforting facade vanished entirely. He snatched the documents off the counter, clutching them to his chest, as a cold, victorious sneer spread across his face. "Thank you for finally being practical, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated arrogance. "I will have my personal attorneys contact you regarding the divorce settlement by the end of the week. You can keep the house, but the firm is officially mine now. Do not try to fight it. You signed away your rights cleanly." He turned on his heel and strode out of the kitchen, practically vibrating with the thrill of his perceived victory. I listened to the front door slam shut, followed by the aggressive roar of his sports car engine as he sped down the driveway, rushing to finalize the transfer and claim his stolen empire. I picked up my coffee mug, walked over to the expansive window overlooking the manicured garden, and let out a rich, genuine laugh that echoed brightly off the kitchen walls. Malik was a man who only ever looked at the surface of the water, completely ignorant of the lethal currents moving silently beneath. What he did not know, what he could not possibly comprehend, was that the moment I cracked his laptop password 3 years ago and noticed the first minor discrepancies in our corporate accounts, I did not just get angry. I got to work. I had spent the last 36 months executing the most complex, untraceable financial maneuver of my entire career. I systematically and legally partitioned the boutique investment firm. I quietly migrated every single blue-chip client, every aggressive growth portfolio, all the intellectual property, and every cent of our multi-million-dollar liquid capital into an irrevocable, impenetrable blind trust based in Delaware. I secured it under a maze of corporate privacy laws that not even the federal government could easily pierce, completely shielding my wealth from any marital or corporate claims. The firm that Malik had just tricked me into signing over to him was nothing more than a brilliant, glittering decoy. It was a hollow, empty shell, but I had not just left it empty. That would have been too easy. I had spent the last 6 weeks actively loading that specific corporate entity with every single piece of toxic commercial debt I could legally acquire. I had aggressively leveraged the firm to assume the failing underwater liabilities of Marcus' bankrupt estate. I had tied the corporate tax identification number directly to the fraudulent offshore accounts Malik had set up. When Malik filed those transfer documents today, he was not taking control of my wealth. He was stepping directly into a financial bear trap. He and Chloe were officially legally assuming full personal responsibility for millions of dollars in insurmountable corporate debt. Furthermore, the transfer of ownership would act as the immediate automatic trigger for the massive anonymous tip I had sent to the Internal Revenue Service last Friday regarding international tax evasion and embezzlement. By the time Malik realized the bank accounts were completely drained, federal auditors would already be seizing his passport and freezing his remaining personal assets. He had just voluntarily signed his own financial death warrant. I took a long, satisfying sip of my coffee. The sun was shining, my assets were completely secure, and the absolute destruction of Malik and Chloe was no longer just a plan. It was a legally binding reality. I walked away from the kitchen window, the warmth of the sun still lingering on my skin. There was no time to bask in the glow of a future victory when the present required absolute, immediate precision. I picked up my car keys and drove straight to the financial district. I completely bypassed the towering glass and steel building that housed the firm Malik mistakenly believed he now owned. Instead, I pulled into the private underground garage of a newly constructed high-rise 3 blocks away. I had leased a sleek, ultra-modern suite of offices on the top floor under my new holding company name several months ago. It was a completely clean, isolated environment, populated only by a select, fiercely loyal team of financial analysts and legal experts who answered exclusively to me. My first appointment of the day was Richard Sterling. He sat across from me in my pristine glass-walled boardroom, sipping black coffee. I did not waste his time with pleasantries or vague assurances. I presented the untangled, legally bulletproof operating structure he had demanded at the gala. I slid the heavy financial models across the table, completely stripping away the polished, hollow narratives Malik had always used to placate our investors. I showed Richard the raw data. I demonstrated line by line exactly how I had generated every single percentage point of their returns over the last decade, while my husband played golf and attended charity luncheons. I detailed the precise algorithms I had built, the risk mitigation strategies I had personally engineered, and the aggressive market positions I had secured. I laid bare Malik's complete lack of foundational understanding regarding the very portfolios he claimed to manage. Richard did not even hesitate. The numbers were undeniable. He signed the transfer authorization, immediately bringing his entire venture capital portfolio under the umbrella of my Delaware Blind Trust. The other major partners followed suit in rapid succession. I spent the next 4 days conducting discreet, high-level meetings with the firm's top-tier clientele. I exposed Malik's hollow figurehead status and gently highlighted the reckless, undocumented offshore mingling he had been attempting. The clients who only ever cared about yield stability and absolute security eagerly signed the transition paperwork. They knew I was the true architect of their wealth. By the end of the week, I had successfully and legally migrated 95% of our core clientele. While I was quietly securing an empire, my soon-to-be ex-husband and his accomplices were loudly celebrating a mirage. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the Wilson family group chat. I had intentionally left myself in the thread, keeping a front-row seat to their spectacular, rapid delusion. They believed the ink on the restructuring document was a magic wand. They did not wait for the forensic accountants to audit the shell they had just claimed. They simply assumed they were invincible. A picture appeared on the screen. It was Marcus leaning against the hood of a brand-new slate-gray Aston Martin, a thick cigar clamped between his teeth. The caption read, "Big moves require big upgrades," celebrating the new era of Wilson wealth. A few hours later, Chloe sent a barrage of photos. She was posing in front of massive wrought iron gates belonging to a sprawling 10-bedroom estate in the most exclusive neighborhood of Tuxedo Park. She was holding up a bottle of vintage champagne, leaning against a sold sign. "Just secured the down payment on our dream home," she wrote. "So incredibly blessed to have a husband and a brother-in-law who know how to truly elevate this family. It takes real sophistication to manage real assets." She followed it with a pointed, undeniable jab aimed directly at me. "Upgrading to a lifestyle some people just lacked the vision to handle. So glad we are finally trimming the dead weight." Eleanor replied with a string of heart emojis, adding, "You deserve it all, darling. Family always rises to the top." I stared at the messages, a cold, genuine smile spreading across my face. It was a masterpiece of financial suicide. They were leveraging the corporate tax identification number of the shell company Malik had just claimed. They were taking out massive high-interest bridge loans and opening exorbitant lines of credit based entirely on the projected value of assets that no longer existed within that entity. They were spending phantom money, enthusiastically piling mountains of personal debt on top of the toxic commercial liabilities I had already buried inside the firm. They were digging a hole so deep they would never see the sunlight again, and they were taking selfies while doing it. On Friday afternoon, I sat at my sleek mahogany desk, watching the sky shift into deep hues of orange and purple over the Atlanta skyline. The heavy oak door to my office clicked open. David, my chief accountant, walked in. He was a brilliant, meticulous man who possessed a deep appreciation for flawless execution. He held a single crisp financial summary in his hand. He walked over and placed it directly in the center of my desk, with a quiet, immensely satisfied smile. "It is officially done, Maya," David said smoothly, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute finality. "The final routing protocols have cleared the international banking channels. Every single dollar of actual liquid cash flow has been completely swept from the old accounts and secured within your new infrastructure." I picked up the paper. My eyes scanned the detailed rows of data. "The old corporate accounts are currently holding zero liquid capital," David continued. They possess nothing but a massive deficit, the operating costs of an empty building, and the toxic debt obligations you transferred last week. Malik Group has officially lost every single legitimate corporate account. The firm he is currently running is entirely insolvent. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the sheer weight of the victory wash over me. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had locked permanently. Malik, Marcus, and Chloe had spent the entire week celebrating their theft, buying supercars and mansions with money that simply did not exist. They were currently standing at the very top of a financial skyscraper that I had just successfully demolished from the ground up. The satisfaction of David report was still warming my blood when my private secure line chimed. It was Vance, the ex-federal investigator I had retained months ago when the very first financial discrepancies appeared. While David handled the forensic accounting, Vance had been tasked with tracking the physical movements and digital footprints of my soon-to-be ex-husband. I instructed Vance to bypass my office and meet me directly at the secure server room down the hall. I walked in to find Vance already booting up a sterile laptop. He did not smile. He was a man who trafficked in the darkest corners of human deception, and his grim expression told me he had hit the absolute motherlode. He handed me a heavy encrypted flash drive. I plugged it in and entered the complex decryption sequence. I expected to see more shell corporations or hidden offshore accounts. I already knew Malik and Chloe were entangled. The restaurant incident with the necklace had exposed their proximity, but Malik had desperately tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a setup, a frantic attempt to keep his brother Marcus from realizing the absolute truth. But the files on the screen were not bank statements. They were photographs, intercepted text messages, and audio transcripts. I clicked on the first folder. It contained hundreds of high-resolution images and security footage stills. Malik and Chloe entering a boutique hotel in Midtown. Malik and Chloe kissing in the shadows of a private VIP lounge. Malik and Chloe holding hands in the back of a tinted town car. The timeline on the time-stamped documents was the true gut punch. This was not a recent fling sparked by the stress of the charity gala. The digital trail went back exactly 24 months. For 2 entire years, while Marcus was struggling to keep his head above water and turning to his brother for support, Malik was sleeping with his wife. They had been carrying on this illicit, repulsive affair right under our noses, laughing at our expense at every family Sunday dinner, every holiday gathering, and every corporate retreat. I opened a folder labeled Communications. The text exchanges were nauseating. Chloe complained endlessly about Marcus calling him a pathetic failure who could not afford to maintain her lifestyle. Malik responded with promises of a grand escape. He assured her that he was moving the funds, that he was isolating me from the firm, and that soon they would be free of the dead weight holding them back. Then I clicked on the final document. It was a secondary, unredacted draft of the purchase agreement for the Buckhead Horizon penthouse. It included a private architectural addendum. The $6 million property was not merely an investment asset or a way to launder stolen funds. It was specifically customized with dual master closets, a nursery wing, and interior design details tailored entirely to Chloe's exact specifications. It was their permanent love nest. They were actively planning to bleed my firm dry, discard Marcus to the wolves of bankruptcy, leave me with nothing, and move into their glass castle together. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. The sheer breathtaking magnitude of their depravity was almost impressive. They were not just greedy, they were entirely devoid of human empathy. Any lingering microscopic shred of pity I might have harbored for Malik vanished instantly. He was a predator, and he was about to step into the ultimate trap. I instructed Vance to compile every single file, photo, and text message into a secure, executable presentation. I wanted it completely finalized and ready for broadcast. I returned to my desk just as my executive assistant Sarah walked in, holding a thick, embossed cream envelope. She looked deeply confused and slightly insulted on my behalf. "This was just hand-delivered by a private courier," Sarah said, placing it carefully in front of me. I picked up the heavy cardstock. It was an invitation to the 10th anniversary gala of Wilson Financial. The host names at the top of the card were listed in elegant raised gold script: Malik Wilson, Chief Executive Officer, and Chloe Wilson, Head of Corporate Relations. My name was nowhere to be found. The woman who had built the firm from a tiny startup into a regional powerhouse had been entirely erased from the official history. This event was their ultimate public relations maneuver. Malik was trying to project absolute stability to the venture capitalists and the Atlanta elite. He was using Chloe as his polished high society shield to prove that the firm was united, thriving, and ready for massive capital investment. By explicitly excluding me, they were sending a clear message to the industry that I was out, that I was a bitter, disgruntled ex-wife who had been successfully excised from the corporate structure. They wanted to humiliate me by demonstrating that the empire would celebrate its biggest milestone without its true architect. I traced the gold lettering of Chloe's name with my index finger. They truly believed they had won. They were throwing a massive multi-million-dollar party funded by lines of credit attached to a bankrupt empty shell company. They were ordering beluga caviar and booking string quartets using phantom money that would inevitably trigger federal alarms the moment the checks bounced. I looked up at Sarah. "Cancel all my meetings for tomorrow morning," I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute chilling clarity. "Contact my personal stylist. Tell her I need to see the exclusive archive collections immediately." I was not just going to attend their little anniversary gala. I was going to be the main event. I was going to walk into that ballroom and personally orchestrate the most spectacular public destruction in the history of the Atlanta financial district. That night, I stood in the center of my massive master bedroom, surrounded by garment bags, velvet boxes, and scattered tissue paper. My stylist had brought a selection of the most exquisite gowns available in the city. I bypassed the safe, elegant blacks and the muted, conservative navies. I was not going to blend into the background like a forgotten spouse. I was going to declare absolute war. My eyes landed on a custom floor-length gown made of heavy, liquid crimson silk. It featured a plunging neckline, structured architectural shoulders, and a daring, dramatic slit that demanded attention. It was not just a dress. It was a suit of armor forged in fire. It was the absolute, undeniable standard of power and confidence. It was the exact shade of blood they had tried to draw from my veins, repurposed into a weapon. I held the crimson fabric up to my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer a victim. She was not the submissive wife, and she was certainly not the discarded business partner. She was the executioner. I smiled, a dark, dangerous curve of my lips. Malik and Chloe wanted a grand celebration to remember. I was going to give them a night they would never, ever forget. The Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom was a symphony of gold leaf, towering crystal chandeliers, and cascading arrangements of white orchids. It practically vibrated with the collective arrogance of Atlanta financial elite. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided seamlessly through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar, truffles, and vintage Dom Perignon. At the very center of the room, standing on a slightly elevated dais near the main stage, were Malik and Chloe. They were holding court, grasping their crystal flutes and playing their stolen roles to absolute perfection. Malik wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo, projecting the aura of a visionary titan of industry, laughing deeply at a joke made by a city councilman. Chloe clung to his arm, draped in a sheer silver sequined gown that left very little to the imagination. She was playing the part of the sophisticated corporate partner, tossing her head back and smiling too brightly, desperately trying to cement her place among the city's oldest money. I did not slip in quietly through the side service doors. I waited in the grand foyer until the string quartet finished their opening classical piece, ensuring the massive room was in a momentary lull of polite applause. Then I gave a sharp nod to the two uniformed attendants standing by the entrance. The massive double mahogany doors were thrown open simultaneously. I stepped over the threshold, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The crimson silk of my custom gown flowed around me like liquid fire. The architectural padded shoulders gave me a commanding, regal silhouette, while the daring slit up the thigh demanded attention with every step. The color was shocking in a sea of conservative black tuxedos and muted, safe pastel dresses. It was a deliberate, violent splash of blood against a sterile canvas. I walked forward with a slow, measured cadence. My posture was flawless. My spine was steel. My stilettos clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, echoing like the ticking of a lethal clock. The conversations nearest the door died instantly. The silence spread inward like a ripple across a dark pond, rolling through the crowd until it reached the center of the room. Heads turned. Champagne flutes were lowered. The elite investors, the politicians, the rival firm executives, they all stopped to stare. I saw Richard Sterling standing near the private bar swirling a glass of scotch. He caught my eye over the rim of his glass and offered a brief, highly respectful nod of acknowledgement. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Malik saw me, and the healthy, confident flush vanished from his face so quickly I thought his knees might actually buckle. He froze his glass, hovering inches from his mouth, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. Beside him, Chloe, triumphant smile fractured into pieces. Her gaze darted from my diamond earrings to my tailored gown, and the sheer undeniable power radiating from my every movement. The jealous, frantic realization on her face was deeply satisfying. She had spent the entire week shopping with phantom money to outshine me only to look completely entirely outclassed. As I glided toward the center of the ballroom, parting the crowd like the Red Sea, Chloe-based survival instincts kicked in. She simply could not handle the fact that I was commanding the room she believed she had stolen. She dropped Malik's arm and marched directly toward me, her silver heels snapping against the floor, her face twisting into a mask of furious entitlement. She intercepted me near a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of the company logo. She physically stepped into my path, forcing me to halt, attempting to block my progress toward the stage. She leaned in, lowering her voice into a harsh, venomous hiss, intended only for my ears, though her rapid, panicked breathing completely ruined the intimidating effect she was attempting to achieve. "You have absolutely lost your mind, Maya." Chloe spat, her eyes darting nervously toward the watching circle of investors. "You are not on the VIP list tonight. You were explicitly excluded from this event for a reason. Turn around, go back to your miserable empty house, and do not embarrass us in front of the board." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stepped further into her personal space, forcing her to take a clumsy, unbalanced step backward to avoid colliding with me. I looked at her with an expression of profound, chilling pity. I did not raise my voice. I did not look angry. I looked at her the way an apex predator looks at a trapped, frantic mouse. I did not even bother addressing her directly. I raised my right hand and made a subtle, sharp gesture toward the perimeter of the room. Immediately, the Ritz-Carlton director of security, a broad-shouldered man with a tactical earpiece, stepped forward from the shadows of the arched columns. He was flanked by 4 immaculately dressed, highly trained hotel security guards. They moved swiftly and silently through the parting crowd, forming a solid, intimidating wall of black suits directly behind me. Chloe smirked, crossing her arms over her chest, completely misreading the entire situation. Her arrogance blinded her to the reality of the power dynamic. She actually thought the guards were there to fulfill her wishes. "It is time for you to leave, Maya." She sneered, her voice gaining a false note of confidence as she looked past me to the security detail. "Escort her out, gentlemen. She is trespassing." The director of security did not look at Chloe. He did not move toward me. He remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on me, waiting for my explicit command. I adjusted the delicate diamond bracelet on my wrist, letting the silence stretch until it became agonizing for the people watching us. I let my eyes sweep over the silent, captivated audience, making eye contact with Malik, who was currently sweating through his custom collar. I pitched my voice perfectly, ensuring its smooth melodic tone carried effortlessly over the ambient noise of the massive ballroom. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dripping with aristocratic absolute authority. "It seems my husband-mistress is completely unaware of who actually owns the ground she is currently standing on." A collective audible gasp rippled through the crowd. Several older board members actually stepped back in shock. I turned my gaze back to Chloe, watching her confident smirk begin to melt into sheer terror. I took a slow step forward. When your fraudulent, newly formed holding company attempted to wire the $500,000 payment to secure this ballroom, yesterday afternoon the transaction was immediately flagged by the international banking channels, I said, enunciating every single word with deadly precision. Your accounts are frozen, Chloe. The checks bounced. The hotel management was going to cancel this entire charade at noon today, turn off the lights, and lock the doors on you and Malik. Chloe shook her head, her breath hitching. No, she whispered, glancing desperately back at Malik. That is impossible. We have millions. You have absolutely nothing, I corrected her smoothly. You have millions of dollars in highly toxic, unpayable commercial debt that you voluntarily signed for. I stepped in 3 hours ago and paid the hotel invoice in full in cash through my own private, fully capitalized firm. I smiled, offering her a look of pure, unadulterated victory. I own this reservation, Chloe, I stated clearly. I am the sole registered host of this corporate anniversary gala. Therefore, I dictate the guest list, and you are currently trespassing at my private party. I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with the director of security. Remove her from my event, I commanded, and remove the man standing behind her. They are no longer welcome. Oh. The director of security took a single definitive step forward, his heavy hand clamping down firmly on Chloe's bare shoulder. She let out a sharp, undignified gasp, twisting wildly against his iron grip. Malik watched his mistress being physically detained. The sheer horror in his eyes was magnificent. He realized instantly that if he allowed my security team to drag him out of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom by his collar, his entire reputation would be vaporized before midnight. The venture capitalists, the board members, the politicians, they were all watching like hawks. His survival instinct, honed by years of pathological lying, kicked in. He made a desperate, manic calculation. He decided to play the ultimate bluff. He completely ignored Chloe's frantic, pleading gaze. He straightened his bespoke tuxedo jacket, forced a wide synthetic smile onto his face, and practically sprinted toward the raised dais at the front of the room. He was going to try and control the narrative. He believed he could smooth talk his way out of a financial execution. I raised a single finger, signaling the director of security to hold his position. I wanted Malik on that stage. I wanted him elevated, illuminated, and completely exposed. Malik bounded up the carpeted stairs and snatched the microphone from its stand. He tapped it twice, the harsh thumps echoing through the cavernous ballroom, demanding the attention of the confused elite. The murmurs died down. Hundreds of faces turned toward him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and elite judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners and cherished friends, Malik began. His voice was smooth, projecting a manufactured warmth that made my stomach turn. He was leaning heavily on his natural charisma, desperately trying to paint the scene unfolding near the doorway as a planned theatrical entrance. Welcome to the 10-year anniversary of Wilson Financial. Tonight, we are not just celebrating a decade of unprecedented market success, we are celebrating a bold, dynamic evolution. I stood perfectly still near the ice sculpture, the crimson silk of my gown pooling around my feet, watching him dig his grave deeper with every word. As many of you know, our firm has recently undergone a massive, highly strategic corporate restructuring. Malik continued pacing the stage with false confidence. He gestured expansively with his free hand. We have streamlined our asset management protocols to maximize your yields. And with this new era comes necessary transition. My beautiful wife Maya has been the foundational bedrock of this company. But as we pivot toward aggressive global expansion, she has decided to step away from the board. She is gracefully retiring from daily operations to focus on our personal estate and our family. A smattering of polite, confused applause rippled through the audience. Richard Sterling crossed his arms, his eyes darting between Malik on the stage and me standing by the doors. He knew a lie when he heard one. I will be taking over as the sole chief executive officer, Malik announced, his voice rising in a crescendo of stolen triumph. And together with my sister-in-law, Chloe, acting as our new head of corporate relations, we are going to steer Wilson Financial into a brilliant, highly profitable future. So please raise your glasses. He lifted his crystal flute toward the ceiling. That was the exact moment I gave the signal. I did not need to shout. I simply caught the eye of my lead technician positioned discreetly in the audiovisual booth at the back of the mezzanine. Instantly, the massive panoramic LED screens spanning the entire back wall of the stage went completely violently black. The warm, golden ambient lighting of the ballroom cut out, plunging the audience into a jarring dusk. A single harsh, high-wattage spotlight snapped on, illuminating Malik in a blinding white glare. He froze, his champagne flute hovering in the air, his smile faltering as the dramatic shift in atmosphere instantly shattered his carefully constructed illusion. The polite applause died instantly. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. I stepped forward. I walked down the center aisle, moving through the sea of silent, captivated guests. The heavy crimson silk of my gown rustled against the marble floor, the only sound in the massive hall. The crowd parted for me instinctively. I did not rush. I took my time ascending the velvet-lined stairs to the stage with the slow, deliberate grace of an executioner ascending a scaffold. Malik watched me approach, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The stage lights illuminated the fine sheen of cold sweat coating his forehead. He looked at me with a silent, desperate plea, begging me not to destroy him in front of the very people he worshipped. I ignored his silent begging. I walked directly into his personal space, stopping mere inches from his chest. I looked him dead in the eye, reached out and forcefully snatched the microphone directly from his white-knuckled grip. For a fraction of a second, pure hatred flashed across his face. But the audience was watching. The venture capitalists were evaluating his every twitch. He had to maintain the facade. He let out a loud, hollow, barking laugh that echoed awkwardly through the silent ballroom. He reached out and clamped a stiff, heavy arm around my shoulders, squeezing tightly, in a pathetic attempt to physically control me. "Ah," Malik said into the microphone, his voice straining with forced joviality as he leaned his head uncomfortably close to mine. "It seems my beautiful wife has a few words she wants to say before she officially hands over the reins. Please, darling, the floor is yours." I turned my head slowly, looking at the man I had spent 10 years building an empire with. I let a slow, brilliant, entirely lethal smile spread across my face. I effortlessly stepped out from under his heavy arm, leaving him grasping at empty air. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice rang out through the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, crisp, melodic, and completely devoid of mercy. "That is exactly right, Malik," I said, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I do have a few words. I want to take this moment to publicly congratulate you and my sister-in-law, Chloe, on the truly outstanding, unprecedented contract you two signed last week." I paused, letting the words hang in the freezing air. I looked down into the audience, locking eyes with Chloe, who was still being detained by my security team at the edge of the stage. Her face was the color of chalk. "It takes a very special kind of partnership to achieve what you two have accomplished." I continued smoothly, turning my gaze back to the crowd of elite investors. "By the way, I also have a gift I want to show everyone tonight." I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers. The gesture was small, but the result was instantaneous. The massive panoramic LED screen spanning the back of the stage flared to life, casting a stark, blindingly bright blue light over the entire ballroom. The first image to appear was not a celebratory montage of corporate milestones. It was a crystal-clear, high-definition projection of the holding company's certified banking statements. I had instructed Vance to highlight the specific routing numbers and account balances, blowing them up to massive proportions, so that even the guests standing by the far exit doors could read them perfectly. I turned to the screens, pointing gracefully toward the glowing numbers. "What you see before you is the current fully audited financial reality of the entity my husband and his sister-in-law just assumed control of," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a surgical blade. "Please direct your attention to the bottom line. You will notice a highly leveraged, inescapable commercial debt totaling exactly $15 million. And directly adjacent to that, you will see the liquid asset column. It currently reads 0. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. I watched Richard Sterling pull his reading glasses from his breast pocket, his face hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury as he verified the numbers. The venture capitalists, the board members, and the elite investors immediately began to murmur their polite confusion, rapidly transforming into aggressive, panicked outrage. They realized instantly that Malik was standing on a stage, trying to court their investments while completely bankrupt. Malik lunged toward the screens, his arms flailing wildly, as if he could physically tear the digital projection down. "Turn it off!" he roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Cut the power! This is a lie! This is a fabricated attack!" "But financial incompetence is only a fraction of the story," I said, raising my voice to overpower his desperate shouting. I tapped the microphone twice, demanding absolute focus. "Let us delve into the true nature of their partnership." I signaled the audiovisual booth again. The banking statements vanished instantly, replaced by a stark black screen displaying a pulsing green audio waveform. The crisp, unmistakable recording I had extracted from the encrypted files began to play through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It was a recording from the baby monitor, captured perfectly and amplified for hundreds of Atlanta's most elite citizens to hear. Chloe's shrill, elitist voice filled the room. "It is almost done. When this contract is signed, she will not have a single cent." Then came Malik's deep, arrogant chuckle. "She signed it all away today. The firm is ours. We are finally free of her dead weight." The ballroom erupted, the polite veneer of high society completely shattered. Women covered their mouths in horror while men openly cursed and pointed at the stage. The sheer predatory cruelty in their voices was undeniable. Malik staggered backward, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. He looked out at the sea of faces, watching the investors he had spent years trying to impress look back at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in the blinding spotlight of his own ruined reputation. "A partnership indeed," I said into the microphone, my tone dripping with icy contempt. "But why stop at audio evidence when the visuals are so compelling?" The screens shifted in rapid, relentless succession. The high-resolution surveillance photos Vance had secured flashed across the massive display, each image 10 feet tall and impossible to ignore. There was Malik and Chloe slipping through the side entrance of the Midtown Boutique Hotel. There they were kissing passionately in the shadows of a VIP lounge. There was the time-stamped security footage of them holding hands in the back of a tinted town car. The digital trail clearly marked a timeline that stretched back 2 entire years. I did not give the audience a single second to recover from the shock. The photos morphed into the final damning document. It was the heavily detailed, unredacted architectural addendum for the Buckhead Horizon penthouse. The screen highlighted the $6 million purchase price, specifically noting the custom dual master closets and the nursery wing tailored precisely to Chloe design requests. They were not just stealing from this firm. I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority. They were systematically draining corporate resources to fund a secret, illicit life together. They bankrupted the very company they claimed to celebrate tonight, just to build their private love nest. I lowered the microphone and scanned the chaotic, roaring crowd until my eyes found the one person who mattered most in this specific tragedy. Marcus was standing near the center bar. The sleek crystal champagne flute he had been holding slipped from his limp, trembling fingers. It hit the polished marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sharp sound of breaking glass managed to cut through the heavy noise of the ballroom. Marcus looked completely drained of blood. His face was a ghostly, horrifying white, his eyes wide and vacant as he stared up at the massive LED screens. He was watching his wife and his brother dismantle his entire reality in real time. For 2 years he had struggled to keep his head above water, turning to his brother for support and trusting his wife to stand by him. Now the absolute truth was being broadcasted to the entire city. His knees buckled slightly. He had to reach out and grip the edge of a high-top table just to keep himself from collapsing to the floor. He could not look away from the images of Chloe smiling at Malik, the same smile she had weaponized against him for years. At the edge of the stage, Chloe was no longer fighting the security director. Her arrogant facade had completely disintegrated. She dropped to her knees in her silver sequined gown, sobbing uncontrollably. She buried her face in her hands, shrieking frantic, garbled apologies, that were entirely drowned out by the noise of the crowd turning violently against them. The elite society she had so desperately tried to claw her way into was now looking at her like she was radioactive waste. Malik was hyperventilating. He turned to me, his hands raised in a pathetic, trembling gesture of surrender. The bespoke tuxedo that had made him look like a titan of industry now just looked like a costume on a terrified, broken man. He opened his mouth to speak, trying to formulate a plea, but his voice completely failed him. He finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He realized in front of everyone he worshipped that he had lost his firm, his reputation, his wealth, and his family in the span of 3 minutes. I stood perfectly still, the crimson silk of my dress, catching the harsh stage lights. I did not offer him a single ounce of sympathy. I had warned him that I was not a woman who could be discarded. The ballroom was in total uproar. Investors were aggressively shouting for their legal counsel, board members were storming toward the exits to mitigate the public relations disaster, and security guards were moving in to surround the stage to prevent a physical altercation. And then, piercing straight through the thick, chaotic noise of the Ritz-Carlton, came a new, highly distinct sound. It started as a distant wail echoing off the towering glass and steel high-rises of the financial district. It rapidly multiplied, growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. Red and blue lights began to flash violently through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel lobby, casting chaotic shadows across the panicked faces of the guests. The unmistakable shrieking wail of multiple police sirens surrounded the hotel. It was not just local law enforcement. It was the synchronized, aggressive arrival of the federal authorities and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division responding to the anonymous, heavily documented tip I had dispatched earlier that week. Malik heard the sirens. He looked toward the lobby doors, his eyes widening in pure animalistic terror. The financial trap had closed, the social execution was complete, and now the legal consequences had arrived to collect their due. The mahogany doors at the rear of the ballroom did not just open, they were violently breached. A tactical unit of federal agents flanked by heavily armed Atlanta Police Department officers and severe-looking individuals wearing IRS windbreakers flooded the grand foyer. The synchronized heavy thud of their tactical boots against the polished marble floor completely drowned out the panicked murmurs of the trapped elite. The venture capitalists, the city councilmen, and the rival firm executives scrambled backward in a chaotic wave, pressing themselves against the silk-draped walls, desperate to physically distance themselves from the blast radius of Malik's impending implosion. A tall, broad-shouldered federal agent with a chiseled jawline and zero tolerance for high society theatricality marched straight down the center aisle. He did not care about the bespoke tuxedos, the terrified socialites, or the cascading white orchids that were now being trampled underfoot. He marched directly toward the stage where Malik stood paralyzed in the blinding glare of the spotlight. The agent pulled a thick, ominous stack of folded documents from his jacket, his eyes locked on his target with predatory focus. "Malik Wilson and Chloe Sterling," the agent voice boomed, carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of federal law. "You are both under arrest." He did not lower his voice to preserve their dignity. He projected every syllable so clearly that every single billionaire board member and potential investor in the room could hear the exact excruciating nature of their disgrace. "You are being charged with multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and federal tax evasion," the agent stated, stopping at the base of the velvet stairs and unfolding the warrant. "We have secured digital and physical documentation proving you forged executive signatures to unlawfully leverage empty corporate assets. You deliberately attempted to secure fraudulent federal loans to purchase a $6 million residential property and multiple luxury vehicles, utilizing completely non-existent collateral." The collective gasp from the audience was deafening. The investors who had just been applauding Malik realized how dangerously close they had come to pouring their fortunes into a massive illegal sinkhole. At the edge of the stage, Chloe finally snapped. The terrifying reality of federal prison fractured her fragile, heavily entitled psyche. She scrambled to her feet, her silver sequined gown torn at the hem and stained with spilled champagne, her face contorted into a mask of feral, unhinged fury. As two female officers stepped forward to physically detain her, She violently jerked her bare arms away, her manicured claws flashing in the harsh light. The carefully constructed mask of the sophisticated worldly corporate partner completely melted away, revealing the rotting toxic core she had hidden for years. She unleashed a torrential, venomous tirade of racial slurs and bigoted filth. Her voice, previously pitched to sound cultured and refined, turned into a shrill, manic screech that grated against the ears. She screamed that she was fundamentally superior, that she belonged to a different, higher class of society by birthright. She spewed horrific racist insults, targeting the arresting officers, pointing her trembling fingers at the firm, diverse board members, and finally hurling the most vile, prejudiced vitriol directly at me. She shrieked about how her kind should not be touched, judged, or arrested by people like us. Her deep-seated, disgusting bigotry laid completely bare for the entire high society of Atlanta to witness. The sheer ugliness of her racism caused an audible physical wave of revulsion to sweep through the room. People who were merely shocked by the financial fraud just moments ago now looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. The elite crowd recoiled from her thrashing form as if she were a walking disease. Even the politicians who had been shaking her hand an hour ago turned their backs in absolute horror. The sea of horrified guests parted once more. Marcus moved through the clearing like a man navigating a waking nightmare. His steps were agonizingly slow, heavy, and completely devoid of the vibrant, trusting energy he usually possessed. He walked up to the edge of the stage, stopping right where Chloe was now being forcibly wrestled to the floor and restrained by the officers. Chloe stopped screaming her vitriol for a fraction of a second. She looked down at her husband, her chest heaving, a sudden desperate flare of manipulative hope lighting up her tear-streaked face. She perhaps delusionally thought his vast wealth, his sterling reputation, and his blind love could somehow shield her from the federal authorities dragging her away. Marcus did not say a single word. He did not yell. He did not cry. He looked down at the woman he had loved with an expression of absolute freezing emptiness. He reached down to his left hand with deliberate mechanical precision. He twisted the heavy platinum and diamond wedding band off his finger. With a sharp, violent flick of his wrist, he threw the ring directly at her face. The heavy metal struck her cheekbone with a sharp, dull smack, leaving an immediate red mark, before bouncing off the wooden stage and rolling away into the dark shadows. Marcus turned his back on her sobbing, handcuffed form and walked away, disappearing into the parted crowd without looking back a single time. A sudden, frantic commotion erupted near the front row of VIP tables. Malik and Marcus' parents, the proud, fiercely protective matriarch and patriarch of the family, could no longer bear the crushing, catastrophic weight of the disgrace. The mother clutched her chest, her face turning a terrifying shade of blue. Her knees buckled entirely as the devastating reality of her eldest son, ultimate betrayal, his total financial ruin, and his mistress' horrifying racist depravity shattered her reality. She collapsed heavily into her husband's arms. Both of them sank to the polished marble floor, surrounded by shouting guests frantically calling for hotel medics and ambulances. Malik had not only destroyed his own life and stolen from his firm, he had publicly humiliated and physically broken the very parents who had worshipped him as their flawless golden child. On the stage, the federal agent moved in. He grabbed Malik's trembling arms, twisting them roughly and unforgivingly behind his back. The cold, heavy click of stainless steel handcuffs locking into place echoed sharply through the microphone that still lay abandoned and live on the stage floor. It was the definitive sound of absolute finality, the permanent, undeniable end of Malik's fraudulent empire. As the officers shoved Malik forward by his shoulders, forcing him to walk the humiliating, highly public path down the center aisle through the gauntlet of his former peers, he turned his head. He looked back at me one last time. His pristine tuxedo was rumpled. His hair was slick with nervous sweat, and his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and brimming with absolute pathetic despair. He was silently begging me. He was pleading with his eyes for a lifeline, for mercy, for me to use my newly acquired power to stop the nightmare. I stood tall near the massive LED screens, my spine perfectly straight, the crimson silk of my gown flowing around me like liquid fire. I held his desperate gaze without a single ounce of pity. I did not blink. I did not frown. I simply watched coldly, a monument of absolute victory, as the man who had tried to bury me was dragged out of the Ritz-Carlton and shoved into the harsh, flashing red and blue lights of the Atlanta night. 72 hours later, the opulent scent of white orchids and vintage champagne had been entirely replaced by the harsh, sterile stench of industrial bleach and stale sweat. The Federal Detention Center in downtown Atlanta was a brutal, unforgiving fortress of reinforced concrete and bulletproof glass. There were no crystal chandeliers here, only flickering, fluorescent tubes that cast a sickly, jaundiced pallor over everything they touched. I sat perfectly still at a scarred stainless steel table in the center of a windowless visitation room. I wore a sharply tailored bone-white cashmere suit. It was a deliberate, calculated choice of attire. I wanted to look immaculate, untouchable, and entirely devoid of mourning. I wanted him to see exactly what he had lost. The heavy steel door at the back of the room clicked loudly, the electronic locks disengaging with a harsh metallic thud. 2 armed federal guards stepped through the frame flanking the prisoner. Malik shuffled into the room. The sight of him was almost jarring. The visionary titan of industry, the man who had strutted across the Ritz-Carlton stage in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo just 3 days prior, was completely gone. In his place was a hollow, trembling shell of a man wrapped in a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit. His perfectly coiffed hair was flat and greasy. The confident, arrogant flush of his cheeks had faded to a sickly grayish white. The heavy chains around his wrists clinked rhythmically against the metal waistbelt as he moved toward the table, a pathetic, dragging cadence that echoed off the cinder-block walls. The guards forced him into the bolted steel chair across from me, secured his waist chain to the table ring, and silently stepped back against the wall. For a long, agonizing minute, neither of us spoke. I simply sat there, my hands folded neatly on top of my sleek leather briefcase, watching him. I let the absolute silence stretch, forcing him to stew in his own profound humiliation. He could not even look me in the eye. He stared at my white leather heels, his jaw trembling, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts of panic. "Maya," he finally choked out. His voice was a thin, raspy croak, completely stripped of its usual smooth baritone authority. "Thank God you came. I knew you would not abandon me. I knew it." He leaned forward, straining against the heavy metal chains, desperately trying to close the physical distance between us. He raised his bound hands, reaching out to touch my fingers across the cold steel table. I did not flinch. I simply withdrew my hands smoothly, folding them in my lap, letting his manacled wrists drop onto the metal surface with a heavy, humiliating clatter. The rejection hit him instantly, but his narcissistic survival instincts overrode his shame. He immediately launched into the performance I knew was coming, the grand, pathetic pivot of blame. "You have to listen to me," Malik pleaded, his eyes wide and bloodshot, brimming with manufactured tears. "It was her. It was all Chloe. She poisoned my mind, Maya. You know how manipulative she is. You know how she resents Marcus, how she resents our success. She preyed on me when I was vulnerable. The firm was facing a minor cash flow issue 2 years ago, just a temporary dip, and she used it to worm her way into my head. She drugged me with all these grandiose ideas about expansion and offshore accounts. She engineered the entire fraud. I was just trying to protect our family empire, and she twisted it into a nightmare." I stared at him, my expression entirely impassive. The sheer audacity of his lies was almost impressive. He was sitting in a federal holding cell facing decades in prison, and he still believed he could smooth-talk his way out of the consequences. He still believed I was the naive, trusting wife he could easily manipulate. She threw herself at me. "Maya," he whimpered, a single tear spilling over his eyelashes and tracking through the grime on his cheek. She threatened to expose the financial discrepancies to the board if I did not play along with her twisted fantasies. She forced me into that hotel room. I never loved her. I was trapped. Every single day I was sick to my stomach with guilt, just praying for a way out so I could come back to you. You are my soulmate. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved." I let him ramble. I let him exhaust his pathetic, cowardly excuses, watching him shift from playing the victim of a corporate mastermind to playing the victim of a seductive predator. When he realized his tears were having absolutely zero effect on my composure, he abruptly switched tactics. He moved to the final, most desperate weapon in his arsenal. He attempted to leverage guilt. "Maya, please." He begged, his voice dropping into a frantic, hushed whisper. "You have your private firm now. You clearly have massive liquid capitalization. You have to hire me a real defense team. You have to post my bail and drop these vindictive civil suits against me. If you do not help me, the federal prosecutors are going to bury me alive. They are talking about 30 years, Maya. 30 years in a cage. You cannot let them do this to me." He leaned closer, his chains rattling loudly, his face contorting into a mask of pure desperation. "Think about what I have done for you. When I met you, you were nothing but a junior analyst with big dreams. I gave you this life. I elevated you. I put you on the board. I gave you the status, the wealth, the platform. I built you. You owe me. And think about our child. Think about our family. You cannot let our child grow up visiting their father behind bulletproof glass. I know you are angry, and you have every right to be furious, but I know you. I know your heart. You are a good, forgiving woman. I know you are not heartless enough to destroy the father of your child." The silence returned heavier and colder than before. He sat back, slightly breathing hard, waiting for his emotional manipulation to yield results. He expected me to waver. He expected to see a flicker of doubt, a tear of sympathy, a softening of my posture. I reached down and smoothly clicked open the golden clasps of my briefcase. "I am not heartless, Malik," I stated, my voice echoing in the small room with terrifying glacial calm. "But you are operating under a catastrophic misconception. You believe you are speaking to the woman you spent 10 years breaking down. You believe you are speaking to the quiet, obedient wife who smiled for the cameras and swallowed your disrespect to keep the peace." I pulled 2 thick, heavy stacks of legal documents from the briefcase and placed them gently onto the stainless steel table. "You are wrong," I continued, my gaze locking onto his terrified eyes, pinning him to his chair. "I did not find my power tonight. I found myself 5 years ago, on the exact night I realized you were siphoning my personal trust funds to cover your gambling losses in Monaco. That was the night the woman you thought you built completely vanished. I spent the last 5 years quietly constructing an ironclad independent empire right under your arrogant nose. I watched you bleed this firm dry. I watched you flaunt your disgusting affair, and I patiently waited for the perfect moment to let you engineer your own absolute destruction." I slid the first stack of papers across the table. It stopped precisely an inch from his chained hands. "These are the final, non-negotiable divorce decrees," I said, enunciating every syllable with lethal precision. "They outline the total forfeiture of any and all marital assets to me, effective immediately. You are waiving your right to any spousal support, any claim to my private holding firm, and any residual equity in the properties you fraudulently leveraged." I slid the second stack of papers directly on top of the first. "And these," I added, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of a death sentence, "are the documents granting me absolute, irrevocable sole custody of our child. You are terminating your parental rights entirely. You will have no visitation, no legal say, and no contact whatsoever." Malik stared at the terrifying legal documents as if they were venomous snakes. He shook his head wildly, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "No," he spat, his voice trembling with renewed, impotent rage. "I will never sign those. You cannot force me to give up my child. You cannot leave me with absolutely nothing. I will fight you in court. I will tell the judge you planned this entire trap." I smiled. It was a small, razor-sharp smile that made the remaining color completely drain from his face. I reached back into my briefcase and retrieved a single, sleek black USB drive. I placed it quietly on top of the custody papers. "You will sign every single page," Malik, I whispered, leaning slightly across the table, the scent of my expensive perfume cutting through the sterile air of the prison. Because if you hesitate for a single solitary second, I will hand this drive over to the federal prosecutor currently building your case." Malik stared at the black drive, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "What is that?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. "This drive contains the unencrypted, fully verified ledgers of the 3 offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands that you thought you had successfully wiped last month," I explained smoothly. "It contains every single fraudulent wire transfer, every hidden asset, and every illegal tax evasion scheme you have orchestrated over the last 7 years. The FBI only knows about the domestic bank fraud regarding the penthouse and the cars. They do not know about the Caymans. They do not know you stole an additional $12 million from international clients." I tapped my perfectly manicured fingernail against the hard plastic of the USB drive. "If I walk out of this room with this drive, you are facing a maximum of maybe 10 to 15 years for the domestic fraud," I stated, laying out his grim reality. "But if I drop this drive on the prosecutor desk this afternoon, the federal government will pile on an additional 40 counts of international wire fraud and tax evasion. They will ensure you never see the outside of a maximum security penitentiary for the rest of your natural life. You will die in a cage, Malik." The silence in the room became absolute. The only sound was the frantic, ragged wheezing coming from Malik's chest. He stared at the black USB drive, his mind desperately calculating any possible avenue of escape, any loophole, any bluff. But he found nothing. He looked up at me, and for the first time in his entire life, the arrogant, untouchable Malik Wilson looked completely, thoroughly defeated. He was a cornered animal staring at the hunter who had outsmarted him at every single turn. A federal guard stepped forward silently and placed a cheap plastic pen on the table next to the documents. "Sign the papers, Malik," I commanded, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Or I will make the rest of your miserable life a federal case study in corporate greed." Malik's hands shook violently as he reached for the pen. The heavy chains clanked and scraped against the metal table as he pulled the divorce decrees toward him. He did not read a single line. He flipped to the back page, his chest heaving with silent, humiliating sobs, and scrawled his signature on the dotted line. He moved to the custody agreements, his tears falling freely now, splashing onto the crisp white paper as he signed away his child, his rights, and his entire existence. When he finally dropped the pen, he collapsed back into his steel chair, burying his face in his manacled hands, weeping with total pathetic abandon. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my white cashmere suit. I gathered the signed documents, verified the signatures with a quick clinical glance, and slid them safely into my briefcase alongside the black USB drive. I clicked the golden clasps shut. The sharp snap echoed in the quiet room like a gavel striking a block. I did not offer him a goodbye. I did not look back. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy steel door, my heels clicking a steady, triumphant rhythm against the concrete floor, leaving Malik to rot in the prison he had built with his own 2 hands. Exactly 1 year later, the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of the federal detention center were nothing but a distant, fading memory. I stood in the center of my new executive suite, the plush ivory carpet silencing my footsteps as I walked toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. The panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a glittering expanse of glass and steel catching the vibrant hues of the setting sun. I was no longer the quiet wife standing in the shadows of a fraudulent empire. I was the chairwoman and sole owner of Vanguard Financial Holdings, and I was looking down at the city I had completely conquered. The transition from the ashes of Wilson Financial to the absolute pinnacle of the financial sector had been brutal, precise, and entirely unopposed. Once the shockwaves of the Ritz-Carlton arrests subsided, the very same venture capitalists and board members who had blindly applauded my ex-husband practically trampled each other to secure meetings with me. They had witnessed my tactical execution of a hostile takeover, and they wanted to align their wealth with a woman who played the game with zero margin for error. Nobody in the high society circles dared to whisper my name with condescension. Nobody called me a parasite, a charity case, or a naive trophy wife ever again. My name commanded absolute terrified respect. The individuals who had spent years trying to break my spirit were currently enduring the agonizing, relentless consequences of their own staggering arrogance. Malik was a ghost, Despite signing the divorce and custody agreements, the federal government had not needed my black USB drive to bury him. The sheer volume of his domestic fraud, combined with the desperate, panicked testimonies of his former partners trying to save themselves, had been more than enough to secure a conviction. He was currently serving a 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There were no bespoke suits, no crystal champagne flutes, and no sycophants to feed his bottomless ego. He was just another inmate in an oversized orange jumpsuit stripped of his name and reduced to a federal identification number. His parents, the fierce, enabling architects of his narcissism, had experienced a spectacular crushing fall from grace. Refusing to accept their golden child guilt, they had liquidated their entire retirement portfolio and leveraged their sprawling suburban estate to pay for a team of high-profile defense attorneys. It was a completely futile effort. The lawyers drained their accounts, lost the case, and left them with absolutely nothing. They were forced to sell their beloved family home to avoid foreclosure, quietly retreating into a cramped, obscure apartment on the outskirts of the city. The high society friends who used to attend their lavish dinner parties had completely excommunicated them, treating their family name like a contagious disease. But it was Chloe's downfall that provided the most profound poetic sense of justice. Marcus had not simply divorced her, he had surgically dismantled her entire existence. Utilizing the audio recordings, the financial trails, and her highly public bigoted meltdown at the hotel, his legal team secured an expedited fault-based divorce. He was granted absolute sole custody of their children, successfully arguing that Chloe was morally and financially unfit to be a mother. Because she had actively participated in a massive federal fraud scheme, Marcus enforced a strict prenuptial clause that left her entirely destitute. The woman who had spent years parading around in sheer designer gowns, sneering at people she deemed beneath her, was now completely isolated. Without access to phantom corporate funds or a wealthy husband to bankroll her delusions, reality hit her with the force of a freight train. To satisfy the court-ordered restitution and her mounting legal debts, Chloe was forced to take the only job that would hire a convicted felon with a highly publicized record. She was currently working grueling, 12-hour shifts at a massive commercial laundry facility on the industrial side of town. The hands she had once used to flaunt stolen diamonds were now perpetually blistered and raw from hauling heavy, damp linens and scrubbing industrial vats. She spent her days sweating under harsh warehouse lights, taking orders from the exact same working-class people she had spent her entire life despising. She had tried to steal my throne, and in return the universe had handed her a mop. I turned away from the window as the heavy mahogany doors of my office swung open. The sharp professional silence of the executive suite was instantly broken by the bright, joyous sound of a child's laughter. My daughter burst into the room, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. She ran across the ivory carpet and threw her arms around my legs, burying her face in the tailored fabric of my trousers. My assistant, a highly efficient woman who managed my schedule with flawless precision, stood smiling in the doorway, giving me a respectful nod before pulling the doors shut to grant us complete privacy. I knelt down, wrapping my arms tightly around my daughter, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of her shampoo. I kissed the top of her head, feeling a surge of fierce, protective love that validated every single ruthless decision I had made over the past year. I had completely eradicated the toxic rot from her life before it could ever infect her. She would never know the pain of being a pawn in Malik narcissistic games. She would grow up in an environment built on absolute truth, unshakable stability, and immense hard-earned power. "How was school today, my love?" I asked, brushing a stray lock of hair from her smiling face. "It was amazing," she beamed, eagerly unzipping her backpack to show me a colorful, slightly crumpled painting she had made in art class. "I painted a picture of you at your big desk." I took the painting, admiring the chaotic splashes of vibrant colors. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," I told her genuinely. "Why do you not go set it up on the coffee table while I finish packing my briefcase? We can go get ice cream before we head home." She cheered excitedly and dashed over to the plush leather sofas at the center of the room, carefully arranging her masterpiece on the glass table. I stood up and walked back to my massive mahogany desk to gather my files. As I reached for my briefcase, my eyes landed on a small, sleek device resting next to my dual monitors. It was a state-of-the-art high-definition video baby monitor. I reached out and gently traced the smooth, curved edge of the device with my index finger. I let out a soft, quiet laugh that barely disturbed the silence of the room. It was deeply ironic. A simple plastic baby monitor had been the very thing that shattered my world. It had been the device that transmitted the horrific, agonizing truth of Malik and Chloe's betrayal directly into my ears. It had been the catalyst for my grief, my rage, and my ultimate awakening. But as I looked at the small glowing screen displaying a crystal-clear feed of my daughter, empty, perfectly secure bedroom at home, the device held absolutely no power over me. It was no longer a tool for uncovering dark, agonizing secrets. It was no longer a hidden wiretap exposing the rot in my own home. It was just a monitor. It was simply a tool to ensure the safety of the person I loved most in the world. I did not have to hide anymore. I did not have to smile through clenched teeth at corporate dinners pretending to be a supportive wife to a man who despised me. I did not have to listen to hushed, venomous conversations through electronic devices to know where I stood in my own life. I picked up my briefcase, the heavy, expensive leather grounding me in the present moment. I looked around my stunning office, taking in the magnificent view of the city I had claimed as my own, and then I looked at my daughter who was happily waiting for me by the door. My life was no longer defined by shadows, lies, or stolen conversations. My life was defined by brilliant, unapologetic truth, unyielding power, and absolute magnificent freedom. I smiled, turned off the desk lamp, and walked out the door. Fade to black.